And we're live! Welcome, everybody, to the first Retro Game Audio Live. I'm your host, Defense Mechanism, and we've got a few other people on the stream here. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves? It's been a minute.
Sure, I was going to say, this is completely unscripted, unlike previous Retro Game Audio, so I was going to try to throw this at you. Welcome to Retro Game Audio. My name's Patrick.
And I'm Steve.
And I am Jeff, the new guy. Hey.
Hey, that sort of worked. Yeah, so I guess to start with, we should just sort of catch everyone up with the state of the podcast and everything, because obviously we haven't done anything in that, 3 years. Very long time now.
It's been a while.
Yeah. So yeah, we didn't really plan this out. We sort of went on a hiatus. But we were bad about communicating about this. That's kind of all on me. I'll take credit for that. We didn't really have plans to stop doing this because talking retro game music is something that we all very much love, but it just kept getting continuously put on the back burner. But you guys have been talking to me like, yo, let's get this going again. So that's what we're doing. This is sort of a reboot. Yeah, I guess I see Mr. Norbert in the chat. Like, Patrick, you're alive. Yes, I am. So we're doing a bit of a reboot here, but this is also a passing of the torch. Because moving forward with Retro Game Audio, I'm going to be a little less involved, and we're going to be passing things over to Jeff and Steve, of course, as well. So I'm very excited about that. The Retro Game Audio brand, if you want to call it that, will be in very, very good hands. I'm a huge fan of everything that Jeff does. Jeff's been a guest on the podcast before, but if you don't know him too well, like at the end of the stream, you're going to be like, okay, yeah, I see why this guy is here.
I appreciate the endorsement.
Yeah, the stuff you've been doing is super cool, and we're going to be sharing some of that tonight. I'm looking forward to picking your brain and asking questions about that because it's super, super cool.
Yeah, and I'd just like to mention too that you're stepping back, but you're not, as far as I know, you're not planning on stepping out.
No.
You're still planning on contributing whenever you can, either to research aspect or being an occasional guest. I believe that's the plan, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so there might be episodes where I'm not present or involved, but it's also not I'm done and don't want anything to do with this. No, this is absolutely There's still days where I'm just my brain is in retro video game music land, and it's no, I still need an outlet to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I'm most looking forward to about this is just the upcoming collaborative aspects of all this, because your input to this podcast and the community in general has been invaluable. It has been essential in so many ways, and I don't think I would have been as interested in doing this if you weren't going to be still involved.
Gotcha. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, this is exciting too. I like that, just everything, the fact that we're doing something different as we're rebooting it too, the fact that we're doing a live stream here. Thank you so much, Defense Mechanism. This is really cool.
I have to say, thank you for allowing me to host it. I feel like anybody who starts to get into chiptune and goes down the rabbit hole, will encounter RGA. So it's such a privilege for me to be hosting this because I've of course listened to the Game Boy audio chip episode. It's just so much that it's a wealth of info, and this is just I'm just nerding out being here.
Cool, thank you very much. Yeah, and if anyone is completely new here, maybe if you found the stream via me tweeting it tonight or whatever, the podcast in its original form has a little over 30 episodes on SoundCloud. That's soundcloud.com/retrogameaudio. It's just a lot of deep dives into why does the NES or Sega Genesis sound the way that they do, deep dives into the history of soundtracks, sound chips, and just anything relating to retro game music that we can think to talk about. Because, there's a lot to talk about. So I guess, but before we begin, we have a list of notes too that just things we wanted to catch up on. But just in general, Steve, Jeff, how are you guys doing? How have you been doing?
You want to go first?
Yeah, you go first, Steve.
I'll go first. Well, it's a big part of, we kind of made an announcement, maybe it feels like 17 years ago, that we were going to transition over, try to do something.
A lifetime ago.
It does feel like a lifetime ago. And a lot of it is, just family stuff. When we started Retro Game Audio, I had no kids, and now I have two. I think between the episodes, like the very last episode that we did, I don't even think my son was born yet, and he's going to be 5. So,
Wow.
or he was just born, and I think we posted some of those episodes up. So, transitioning to kind of like dad mode has been kind of where I'm at. And Jeff, I'm sure you'll kind of say similar things, but it's been a little hard to just find that time, especially when you just like it gets to like 9 p.m. and you're completely exhausted. And Patrick, we used to record at 1 in the morning.
Yeah.
Like we used to do our recordings at like 1 in the morning. I'm not even kidding. We like 12:30 at night. We would record from like 12:30 to 3:30 in the morning or something. And the energy for that has just been kind of lacking.
Yeah, no, we got burnt out for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, we did. But life stuff. I've been just working on a lot of soundtrack work. Just trying to keep busy. Playing a lot of video games or catching up on video games, which I haven't done in a long time.
You organize an entire chiptune compilation album?
Oh yeah, I did that. Yeah, that's just tip for change. I've done so much stuff lately that it just kind of like, yeah. But you would do that wasn't Tip for Change. It was
Chiptune Cares.
Chiptune Cares. There you go. Just for Change is what's his name? This thing. Yeah, Chiptune Cares, which raised $2,000 for Black Doctors COVID-19 consortium, which was pretty cool. A lot of people participated, and it was like we got some people come out of the woodwork who hadn't contributed in like 2 or 3 years, or haven't done anything in like 3, maybe I think even 8 years, some of them. So it's pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, I've mostly been doing soundtrack work, and a lot of the stuff that I've been working on is kind of under wraps and can't be talked about, and it's very frustrating because it's really exciting, like super ridiculously exciting. And the one that comes out, I'm 100% sure we're going to end up doing an episode about, because it's it was kind of a wild ride. And,
some of the stuff, again, I know we can't spill the beans on any of the stuff, but yeah, just some of the stuff you've been working on is super, super cool. And our audience would be like, oh, you're working on that? Like, shit.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. Really cool stuff.
But yeah, that's pretty much it. We was kind of thinking about trying to find a way to get retro game audio back up. A lot of our research and a lot of things we do takes a lot of time. So I just thought it'd be like a good idea. Maybe we should just do like a live version of it, and 1, have this discussion about our lives, but 2, bring up like some fast hits about things that have happened in the last like 27 years since we've been on hiatus. And also, just have Jeff introduce himself and Patrick talk as well. So I guess I'll pass it over to. Yeah, I'll pass it over.
Yeah. I feel like the other point of the stream is just to show that RGA still has a pulse. We're not completely dead in the water here. Like we're still alive. We are still actively, maybe not as persistently active as we should be or need to be, but we are still working on this. So yeah, I'm pretty much in the same boat as Steve. I've got 2 kids under 3, and there's not enough time in the day or hours in the night to sleep. Like I am up past my bedtime right now. my kids went to bed at 8, and usually so do I. So
Wow.
Yeah. The parenting lifestyle is it makes hobbyists, like the time for your fun projects goes down the drain. And I feel like every time I want to work on something, it's like I have to play this like game of roulette with myself. Like, do I want to work on my own music stuff? Do I want to work on something for martial art? Do I want to work on something like a recording project? Do I want to take a night off and relax, and or do I just need to go to sleep? And oftentimes the roulette wheel spins and lands on the go to bed. So yeah, but I mean, that's not to say that I haven't been up to some stuff. Over the past couple of years, I've been involved with a decent number now of official video game soundtrack releases for some classic and some well-known and well-loved video games, some of which we're going to be talking about here tonight on this broadcast. I done a few projects with my band Martial Art, so I compose the NES and various consoles chiptune music for a band called Martial Art, and the rest of the band overlays some live guitar, live drum, live instrumentation. We've done in the past year an original album that was recorded, pseudo live from home, kind of like our pandemic album. We've also done an album of video game covers and a handful of singles here and there in the past couple of years. We're working on another video game cover like right now. Actually, like I tore down my mixing setup so I could set up for this broadcast. but we've got a song that's in the cooker right now that should be coming out on a compilation that you guys will hear about hopefully relatively soon. Can't really get into the details yet, but yeah, we've got a few things in the pipeline that we're working on.
Cool, and I know we're gonna go into a bunch later, like more towards the end of this discussion, I think. But I am a big fan and really excited for all the work you've been doing on these soundtrack releases.
Yeah, there's stuff I haven't told you about, man. That I would like. I'm so excited
cool.
for it to come out. But yeah,
I should give some context to the listeners here. But like, we're always excited when classic game soundtracks get like pressed to vinyl. It's a fun thing to collect. You're finding these old video. Sometimes kind of obscure or these sort of cult video game soundtracks that you would never expect to get physical releases. But there've been some times where the releases, we've had some criticisms about the, maybe I remember there was that one Lagrange Point vinyl. I'm very happy that I own it. But the sound was like sourced from emulation. And it's just like one of those little things where it's like, oh man, like there could have just been a little bit more TLC for its production. And Jeff is just knocking it out of the park with the stuff that he's been doing with his soundtrack releases, and we'll be going over all of that later.
Yeah, I've speaking of Lagrange Point, I've actually offered if there's ever a repressing of that album to source fresh audio.
Yes,
I don't know if they're ever going to try to squeeze more juice out of that lemon, because I believe they pressed quite a number of copies of that that album. But gotcha. If it does happen, yeah, that will get. I am completely game to do a fresh audio recording for that.
Yeah.
I've got the cartridge somewhere over in one of my other rooms, but yeah, I'm well prepared to do that one and would be eager to work on it. So yeah,
fantastic. Yeah, just the whole thing's just been super cool from my perspective. Just like finding out that you were doing that stuff, I was like, oh, they found the right guy for the job. Like that was my sort of look at that, all that.
So it's really because it's kind of funny that we're talking about this now, because like I really owe my guest appearance on RGA, but I think it was like episode 38. The episode about recording from chiptune hardware. That was basically my resume to get into the door for doing this work. So yeah. I really like I owe it to you guys. I owe it to you, Patrick and Steve here, to like for landing me these gigs. Basically, like if it wasn't for that episode and wasn't for like me kind of like putting my name out there through you guys, none of this stuff would have ever really come to happen. So yeah, we're coming full circle here.
That's super cool. Yeah, you're doing the really cool work. I'm happy that we could have helped in some small way facilitate that. But yeah, that rules.
Yeah, we just put a script together, and that's you're doing the real legwork, like
Yeah.
Well, that's not entirely true, Steve. Like I mean, you did a lot of the work for one of the things we're going to be talking about here later. So give yourself a little bit of credit here too.
Well, it's like it's the greatest thing about this is, right, like we've seen so many releases of so many soundtracks, and there's so many of those 90s releases and stuff like that with the weird reverb and just like crazy quality control for all these things. And one of the things that we've always talked about, even just on retro game audio, is like having absolute fidelity, like the closest thing we can get to the most pure version of the sound. And then to be someone who talks about that kind of stuff, and then also the person who's the steward of producing that, it's like, because like, who else should they hire besides someone who's like really legitimately criticizing every imperfection of like, oh man, they use like on the Gimmick soundtrack, they definitely use the emulation version, or like, or who else knows that but us?
Yeah, exactly. Like, exactly.
If they recorded it from the wrong NSF, we know they used the wrong NSF because we know that there's two different versions of that NSF.
Like yeah, exactly. Like we are the people who give a shit, and we are the people you should be hiring for this. So yeah,
that rules. Yeah. So we had a sort of checklist of community notes. Did you guys want to jump right into that?
Yeah, let me just pull it up here too, so I can make sure we're getting everything here.
Yeah, this is going to be our sort of catch up on just like general stuff that's happened. Like not necessarily in our personal lives so much, but just like chiptune community news, stuff that we would have been talking about on the podcast had we continued. It's like a bit of catch up here that we got to do.
Yeah, and obviously this is not an entirely exhaustive list in any way, shape, or form. This is kind of just like things that popped up into our heads as fairly recent, fairly relevant news.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Steve, if you want to start, we had something about the Makoto going on here.
Yeah, so the Makoto, which was being worked on by Temu, I think that's the name now, but basically it's the OPNA cartridge for MSX, right? And there was prototypes. I think I still have 2 prototypes. The board really actually uses a real OPNA on it and everything. And with help from just like that original schematic or whatever, there's now a version for the public that's been put on the market. I think it was available in Akiba as of a couple months ago. I had Kev Vergone from many chiptune bands when he was like every chiptune band. He plays drums on every chiptune band. He was in Tokyo, so I asked him if he could try to get me a copy, and either they didn't want to sell to him or they were sold out. So I really wanted to see what a fresh copy of what that was there. But having OPNA on MSX is great, and if you could find a way, there's now cartridges out in the wild that can do that, and then you just get a flash cart and go ahead and play basically anything you want from the PC-98 library. It's pretty cool.
That's awesome. I remember that was a long time coming. I know former handle I think was Trackman, but it's Aotemo, something like that. Or they were like really focused on putting this thing together and did all of this insane work to create this device. And I just remember it was just like years in production of getting it all together and finally getting it out into public. And I know you are like the resident MSX nerd of our crew, and so I know you definitely got to get I know you've been obviously trying to get your hands on one, but yeah, I hope that works out for you soon.
I just like if it's MSX and it's sound, I need it, even if it's just something that I like, like I already have or something like that, And I really want to do, as an example of an episode that we could have done, a comparison as to how that was like put together versus the one that's current, like in the old Makoto. I believe there was some improvements that were made to the model to make it even little less friction of the sound. But I would have to test that, right? And Makoto operates differently on. I mean, part of the reason why I had one of the prototypes is I tested it on like pretty much every kind of MSX I could get my hands on to see what the what it would happen for, just from really early MSX ones all the way up to the GT and all that stuff like that. And so I'd be very curious to see what the noise comparison would be, or the suppression of noise, or like a little bit of a buzz in there would be on the new model versus the prototypes.
Very, very cool. Verniac Squarewave in the chat was pointing out that there's some ridiculous OPN expansion port for the NES, apparently. That apparently sounds kind of similar.
I heard about this. I forget the name of it. Someone sent it to me and I retweeted it, but that could have been like a couple months ago. I don't know.
That's totally wild. That's awesome. Yeah, that rules. Did we want to move on to the next line of discussion?
Yeah, so there's quite a bit of tracker news for the people who are composing their own video game music and chiptune music. The new player on the scene right now is Furnace Tracker. So if you guys are familiar with, Deflamask being a multi-system tracker with support for a lot of the FM consoles, Furnace Tracker is basically that on steroids and also completely open source. Furnace Tracker supports such a wide variety of consoles and sounds and feature sets. It's pretty well poised to be like the one-stop shop for anybody who wants to compose for pretty much any sound chip in any console that has an active chiptune scene.
Great example. Like, there's so many crazy things with it, like just like modules. Like, someone asked me if I could, like, one of the soundtracks I was working on, if I could do double Wonder Swan, and you can do double Wonder Swan in it. So if you're wondering, and if you do like regular one Wonder Swan, you should be able to. Oh, I think we lost Jeff. But you can do double. He'll be back, sure. But you can do double Wonder Swan, and you can, if you do single Wonder Swan, you can export it, and it has a fairly good chance of actually working on console too. So we haven't had any solutions for that kind of stuff before. If you wanted, you could do triple Wonder Swan. It's not just like it has like one chip or whatever. You can add all the chips. Like, I did something weird where it's like Wonder Swan plus Game Boy Wave Channel plus FDS. So it's like 2 wacky wave channels and then the Wonder Swan wave channels. That ability to do that is something that you couldn't really do before. And it uses Deflamask's interface, so it's something that's like a known entity. It's really cool, and they keep adding stuff to it over and over and over again. I don't even know which is the most current fork, because I have like 7 different forks, and sometimes I open it and I have the wrong one.
That sounds incredible. Like, is there a way? Can you? Does it support Amiga? like mod?
I think so. Yeah.
I believe it does. Yeah. Sorry
believe
for
it
the
does,
drop
yeah.
out there, by the way.
So I could hypothetically like put out like Amiga drum beats, but like alongside NES music
Yes.
Yep.
and track. Oh wow.
The
Okay,
only
that
thing
sounds
is,
awesome.
I think it only
Okay.
exports VGM or maybe one or two things. So like, we've got a comment from Puke in the chat. We need play routines.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
That is one of the limiting factors right now. But I believe a lot of them are being worked on. And if you're exporting to VGM format and you've got if you're working with a reasonable subset of hardware, maybe not dual WonderSwan or triple WonderSwan, but something a little bit more traditional, we'll say, you could probably make it work.
Yeah, I've gotten the just like fooling around with it. I made a VGM that had OPNA and OPM, and I got it to work on MSX. So
Yeah.
that's ridiculous. That's a lot of you. I mean, it took forever to load, but it still worked. So, I mean, if there's reasonable hardware that you can kind of put together and you could get it into VGM format and you have some kind of encapsulated way to replay the VGM, you can do a lot of fun stuff.
That's super cool. Because I remember like something that we talked about way back when we made our episode on Super Nintendo music is that like there weren't a lot of great tools for making Super Nintendo music. So I guess this is probably the sort of did I heard correctly? This does support Super Nintendo.
Yes.
That's awesome. Do you know if it supports all the bells and whistles, like noise generation, like like the sort of FM modulation or whatever?
I haven't poked around with it too much, Steve. Have you tried any of the SNES features?
I haven't actually. I've still, when I have to do an SNES, I still just use Milky because I just remember Milky from 100 million years ago. But it's something I should look into, like with Furnace. Because
I do want to shout out Dammy Fortune from Battle of the Bits wrote a guide on making SPCs and SNES music, and the two tools that he recommends the most are the C700 VST, which most people are probably familiar with, and SNES Mod, which is like an IT converter. And I know Furnace does have, it's getting there, but you can't export SPC with it yet. So yeah, I'm sure that it will overtake those other two tools, but yeah.
That's super cool.
The guide is called Intense NES Tech. Intense NES Tech. Which was borrowed from my Intense Tech LSDJ blog series.
So we didn't have this in our show notes here, but we were talking about SNES music, and it reminded me of this little guy, which I picked up recently.
Oh, it's blurring it out.
It's blurring it out.
Oh, it's the Super MIDI pack.
It's the Super MIDI pack. My Discord blur is Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Yeah, so I have cartridge. It's probably gonna blur this out too. Yes, it is. 0005. Been playing around with this a little bit for some martial arts stuff and for some separate projects here. I've got actually like a MIDI console choir practically right now, or a MIDI console quartet that I've been working on right now.
There's a comment from Verniac Squarewave here. It says, it does all of it, filters, echo, pitch mod, noise, surround, everything. I think that's referring to Furnace.
Yeah. That rules, because back when we made the Super Nintendo episode, it's like there were tools for converting, like mod, like IT files.
Oh god, yeah.
But like, which was a great foundation, but it's like, oh man, what about all of the weird bells and whistles, all the weird tricks that make it sound really uniquely like the Super Nintendo. So knowing it can do all of that, that's huge. I got to play around with that.
I think this is a good way to transition. Sorry, Jeff, you have one more point here, guy. I was gonna.
No, I was just going to say it's something that I've only really scratched the surface of, but like it's because it's open source and because it's like in active development, it's been really, really fascinating to watch it grow. I think it's really poised to be like a really powerful tool. It's like for anybody who's like not composing, directly on hardware, say like LSDJ style, where you're actually using the console interface to compose music. For anybody who's using a PC based software, it's supplanting a lot lot of things right now.
It's also cross-platform, like it.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's from the ground up being. It's ticking off all the boxes that you'd want a tool like this to do. And I've been a part of their Discord community. Haven't really been active, but I've been just like watching some of the conversations happening in there, and they are incredibly active and pretty supportive as well. So. Yeah, I'm really impressed with what Furnace Tracker is cooking up right now.
That's great. Yeah, I put here in the notes. I won't have as much to say here, but Huge Tracker in GBS Studio. I'd be curious to see if you guys have ran into that at all yet.
I'm aware that it exists.
Yeah, so it's kind of
I'm
interesting.
so far behind on new stuff. Like people be like, I think like my OCC version that I write most of my music in is one of the originals. I don't even know. I'm so far behind. It's like
Yeah.
the last 5 years have just paused.
Likewise for
Yeah.
me, like I haven't kept up with all the latest news for trackers and these types of tools, but I just literally like last week learned about this thing called GBS Studio, which is software for making homebrew Game Boy games.
Yeah.
So it's like this game maker toolkit, but I guess it incorporates some fork of something called Huge Tracker apparently. So it's straight up like you can make Game Boy games with the software, but it straight up has a Game Boy tracker in it for making music, which is super cool. And one of the really neat features of it too, even though I'm sure like all of us are fans of the tracker format and everything, it has a piano roll mode at the touch of a button. You can toggle between tracker display and piano roll. And I thought that was really novel. I know again, so many Game Boy composers use LSDJ. And then in terms of like tracking on PC, there used to be some very old school programs that weren't very modern and easy to work with.
Yeah, Paragon 5.
Right, Paragon 5.
Oh, man.
Fill me on the name there. Yeah, that's precisely what I was thinking of, and the name wasn't coming to mind. But now we're finally in the modern era. We have stuff like GBS Studio, which is very slick. This really neat, well-designed user interface for making Game Boy music. And then again, I'm just learning about Furnace Tracker now, which I'm sure is also just completely decked out for making Game Boy music as well. So, yeah, if you want to make Game Boy music on a computer and aren't planning on using the hardware, LSDJ or like LSDJ in an emulator, there's new tools that are just so much more like fleshed out now, which is incredible.
I'm sure this isn't in the notes, but it just made me think of when you said piano roll. FAMI Studio is a piano roll based NES tool that can import NSFs and it can export, and it looks really cool. I haven't used it at all, but it looks pretty awesome.
Yeah,
that's rad.
You spurred on the same thought with me too, because like as soon as you mentioned the piano roll, like FAMI Studio is another one of these tools that it is growing and rapidly becoming incredibly powerful. I used it to import an NSF that used an expansion. I don't want to get into too many details here because it's talking about a project that I'm working on that I'm not allowed to really say very much about. But I use it to import an NSF with an expansion that is not supported by the normal NSF import tools. That the one that has existed for what feels like eons now. The FAMI Tracker fork by Rain Warrior. And I mean, I wasn't too comfortable switching to like the FAMI Studio interface. Like I'm still more of a tracker person, especially when it comes to the chip hardware. But you can export from FAMI Studio a FAMI Tracker text file and import that into your current flavor of the day FAMI Tracker fork and run with that. So you basically cool. So you can get from basically any NSF file, any precompiled NSF file, any game rip NSF file, a tracker equivalent. I mean, it's the usual like speed 1 type thing that you're used to from your NSF import tools. But yeah, for reverse engineering and breaking down existing VGM music, existing NSF music, and I guess people who are working at transcriptions, people who are just doing it from that angle, it's another one of these tools that is just incredibly valuable, and just people are doing such great work these days. It's amazing.
It's really cool to see these increased efforts in like cross-platform compatibility. Something I forgot to mention with like Huge Tracker and GBS Studio is that lets you import mod and IT files. So if you were porting like a classic Amiga game or doing something weird, you can just like use that as your base and then just convert it to like a Game Boy chiptune. And I'd also like to say too, like you touched on it with preferring tracker format. I think that applies to probably most of us here for making classic chiptune music, but having stuff like piano roll available is huge, quite frankly.
It's anything that lowers the barrier of entry for people, anything that makes things more comfortable and easier, anything that makes this community more accessible for people who want to join in or come at it from a different angle.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Because like I don't know how involved I ever would have gotten if like the only tools were MML, You know,
Right.
My obsession with retro game music probably would have had me poking around and making some stuff or whatever. But it's just like, oh, Tracker is the reason like I'm able to do stuff, and like the reason I would be down to like just open up a Fama Tracker file and just like make something. You know, there's a lot of classic people who just absolutely nailed it with MML, and they're just like, this is what they prefer to do. I think of people in the community going way back, like Rush Jet, just like writing stories of him apparently like back when he was in grade school, like in math class, apparently working on one of his chiptune albums, just sitting there like with an MML file, like just hacking that out, which is nuts. But yeah, like the Tracker is a huge leap from MML for like having a user interface where like, oh, you can see this makes more sense. But it's still weird, right? Like if you're someone who's just like, you went to school for music or something like that, you love making music, but you haven't done this super deep dive into retro game music, and you're starting to learn about it, and maybe you want to make a Game Boy sounding tune. It's like a lot to ask to be like, okay, you know a lot about music, you know a lot about music theory, you're a talented pianist. Here's a Tracker. Have fun with that.
Yeah.
Learn
hexadecimal. Like
yeah, it's just really weird. It's like, oh, your vibrato's like, you know, P7F or something, I don't know, or like your fine pitch or whatever. It's weird. So to have like these more modern user interfaces, and you know, there have been some tools for that for a while in terms of, you know, plug sounds for VSTs. That's a huge, majorly important tool set. If you want to
Somebody mentioned about that the plug chip sounds SFC has been one of the intermediary things that came out.
Excellent. Yeah, so just all this sort of all these tools becoming more modern, more accessible is huge. And you know, this is the sort of stuff that people who are younger than us, people who are looking at the stuff now, are going to benefit massively from, which is great. This isn't something that, like, again, it shouldn't be only like people who are like late 30s, 40s plus like MML file. Like those are not the only people who should be making chiptunes. Absolutely not.
I think too, just like, you know, and not to say that it's like our podcast that led to a lot of this, but sometimes people say this to me, just in general, it's like, I think a lot of the academic research, or, you know, the really heavy, deep research that we did into what we're doing has opened the door for a lot of this other stuff. One, because there's been interest, but two, because there's, you know, some of the stuff we looked at, if you remember, there was no clear source for the information we were trying to find. Like, you know, we were literally looking at like someone's word about what is right or whatever from some kind of website until we actually tested it out. And I feel like just the kind of academic, not just around this podcast, but other people realizing that this has to be treated kind of academically and seriously, as opposed to just, you know, for lack of a better term, phoning it in, you know, has allowed for, you know, really the scrutiny that needs to be, so we're not like GXSCC, you know, on everything, right? Like we're really legitimately, like, when we say VRC6, we mean VRC6. When we say, you know, when we record something from cartridge, it's literally from the cartridge. It's exactly as programmed.
I don't like you throwing shade on my GSXCC, my favorite. GXSCC, I know how to pronounce it.
I mean,
it's real fake bit. It's real fake bit.
just different strokes for different folks, but you know,
it has its place and it has its use.
Well, I was gonna say something about like, do you guys know of any like resulting kind of effects that like have rippled down the line? I'm trying to think of examples, like with some of the questions that I've asked about LSDJ, it's actually resulted in people going back and taking a look at the code of their Game Boy emulators to see, like, why does the noise channel cut out? That happens on hardware, and it never happens in emulators. And now, after some investigation, we've got emulators where the noise channel cuts out, for better or worse. But for me, it's like, for the people who care about accuracy and fidelity, like, that's, you know, like, we could be responsible for some of those, you know, things. And now I only record off of an emulator because it's like, well, it's just as accurate. Well, it's not really, but it's getting better.
There's been huge strides with that as a result of, I don't know if I can point to us, but like as some of the members of the RGA community, like people who are in the Discord, like I point to like someone like PLG David and the work that they're doing over at Plog for their VST research, like, and the guys who are at what's the name of MD Fourier, MD Artemio, and those guys, like the research that they're doing, the depth of the dives that they're doing into this hardware has made progress in emulation just it's like emulation was close back in the day. Like it was good enough back in the day, but now we've gone from being good enough to great, and great to like perfection in some cases.
Yeah.
So like there's been a lot to celebrate.
Yeah, the thing that excites me a lot about like the sort of progress being made on this front, and it's something I've talked about before in the past too, I think, but it's sort of like if you look at the history of electronic music, video game music was always in this own weird corner where like there's a lot of books you can buy, a lot of history, a lot of documentation about like analog synthesizers, the history of that music, right? It's something that it's kind of like understood academically. There's a lot of resources, but there's the other half of electronic music, which is like the early programmed stuff, computer music, and that I felt like has always been a little underrepresented in terms of like what tools are available, what are people using. You know, we grew up as, you know, video game consoles were black boxes to us. You know, we didn't know what exactly was going on with them. So it's tons and tons of years of reverse engineering and research from just a wide group of people, and yeah, it's really exciting to see. Just like if someone showed me all the tools that exist now, you know, right from like the early 2000s, like my mind would be just absolutely blown and like overwhelmed, quite frankly.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an interesting space because the early 2000s had a big boom for people like composing chiptune music, but just things are in a much better place now with understanding the hardware and the tools that are available. It just keeps getting better.
Absolutely.
All right, so the next two items in our list are kind of a tandem pair, I think. It's kind of a there's been some deaths in the VGM and the chiptune community in terms of maybe that's a little bit too harsh.
I was going to say the fact that we're laughing should preface that we're not talking about anything too dark yet.
No. So rest in peace, the Family Tracker website and message boards. They unceremoniously vanished off the internet. Presumably, someone didn't renew their server or their domain name, and it's gone. And unfortunately,
it's a bummer. But these things happen. You know, you can't fault someone who contributed so much to the community and expect them to be around updating that stuff for eternity. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No,
it is a bummer, though.
Yeah, that's the flip side of that is like I feel like there's been a loss of knowledge and a loss of tools because I've come across it in recent months where I'm looking for some obscure tool or some obscure document that someone's made, and it was linked in a Family Tracker message boards forum as an attachment. And I think it's gone, and the Internet Archive only covers so much. So
yeah, I think my old DPCM sample pack I think was hosted on the forums there. That wasn't the most updated version though. Verniak made like a way more like updated version. I believe that's somewhere, maybe. I don't even know what the latest DPCM pack for NES music is, but yeah, that was something that I had hosted on the Family Tracker forums for a long time. So I'm sure that original link is gone now.
I think a few people Fuxoside and another collaborator have done some work to archive some of the original sites as well as the attachments. I don't know that they recovered everything, but there are some links out there and around. In our Discord, we've got a link to those. So if anybody needs to go hunting through it, old familytracker.com attachments, hit me up.
But I should ask too, just question for the audience too, if anyone here happens to know, if you did want to get a collection of NES DPCM samples from a library of games, like, is there a latest resource for that? Like,
I still have the one that you made. Like, I still,
it honestly kind of sucks if what I made again, it was updated, but beyond what I initially did, but still, just the fact that like what I did, it was like, if that's like the best that's available, like, no.
Berniak says, I have your pack from 2014.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Mr. Norbert says, nope, it's not gone, and that he archived it.
Yeah, it's good. There really ought to be, though. Like, there should be a DPCM pack that's literally every NES and Famicom soundtrack from back in the day. It should have like 100% of those should be dumped, which maybe they are by now. I don't know.
I feel like someone like Mr. Norbert would be well poised to do something like that. He is pretty much the keeper of the NSF archive in its current state right now.
He's happy that you mentioned that, I think.
Yeah. So if anybody's looking to continue working with FamiTracker and can't find now that the FamiTracker website is dead and gone, there are still some currently active forks of FamiTracker that are going. These are all based on an older version of the FamiTracker source, and they've been maintained and forked and passed along by several people over the years. But the current active one the current most active one that I'm aware of anyway is DN FamiTracker, which I believe is descendant from OCC, which is there's probably another one in the middle. I will copy and paste the link into the YouTube chat.
Yeah, it is DN
there we go.
FamiTracker. I think it's like 0501 or something like that.
Yeah,
maybe a quick kind of bug fix release, because I think there's a repository change, so it might show you that there's a newer version if you check for updates, but there isn't one yet.
I didn't even know that existed. I'm still using like the original OCC.
Shout outs to D's Nuts FamiTracker. That is unofficially what the D. Maybe it's official. I don't know.
I remember I was sharing files with Dino and sharing it back and forth, and he didn't have compatibility because he was just using vanilla FamiTracker, the one that didn't even have like N163 support or whatever. No, it had it listed as what did they call the Namco thing that was wrong? Like the 129, or like there's like something they called it that was the wrong name. I can't remember it. Like
That's
the old name for it. Yeah.
I was behind the curve on adopting to OCC as well, which of course now I'm sure I have a very outdated version of that.
JOCC is the other one, the other fork that got lost.
I'm gonna open up my files here and see what's the latest FamiTracker that I have. I have OCC version 0315. So I don't even know how old that is now. Is that quite old? I'm sure.
I think that's going back a few years.
Yeah.
What is mine?
Somebody has a question. Robbie Vok asked, re-emulator accuracy. What do you see as possibilities that FPGA/MiSTer will open up for game audio research, composition, etc.? Also, is this even a Q&A? A Q&A, if not, my bad.
It is now.
It is now.
I'll start off to say first, hey Robbie, awesome, great to see you here. I have no knowledge or understanding of any of this, so I'm going to run away and pass it to you guys.
So I'm not intimately familiar with the MiSTer, but I mean I know what it is, and in my view, anything that attempts to recreate and preserve some of this aging hardware is nothing but positive. This hardware is not going to last forever. These consoles, these old chips that we're using, these things that we love and dearly and rely on for our hobbies and careers in some cases, these don't have an infinite lifespan. There's only so much we can do to keep these things going and ticking and running. So modern recreations, keep them coming, keep working on them. I've been following some of the development just kind of like casually, and I'm not like I have no personal investment in it, but from what I understand, there's a great deal of care and attention to detail that goes into these things and making them get the nitty gritty details right. The stuff that you and I and everybody else here would only care about. Yeah, they're working on that. They're making that happen. So, yeah, like I said, I don't see these things as being anything but a positive and a benefit for anybody who's working on chiptune music and anybody who enjoys chiptune music.
Great.
That totally reminded me that I forgot to order the Duo today.
The analog thing.
Speaking of
probably never gonna
FPGA
get
and
one
analog, I was going to say that it's not necessarily all guaranteed to turn out perfectly, because like even the analog pocket, I don't own one, but I've asked friends who do, like, does the LSDJ playback work? Because there are a lot of fancy tricks going on in the wave channel to get like super smooth sample playback, especially in the newest versions, and it doesn't sound like hardware. So it just goes to show you that like you gotta. I'm sure they'll get there, and I know that a bug has been opened for that, so it'll probably get addressed at some point in time. But hopefully, as long as we keep like hammering away at that issue, and others like it, that it will be accurate at some point. I gotta imagine.
Yeah, so I think it's Kevtris is the the primary developer for a lot of the analog products. I have nothing but respect for that guy. So
Yeah.
like you said, if it's not accurate now, I have no doubt in my mind that if he's aware of the issue, he's going to be working to crack it and get it back to, or get it to the state where it's a 1-to-1 match to hardware. The attention to detail in some of those products is second to none. Like if it's not 100% accurate, it's still, in my view, like these things are the next best thing to having real hardware.
And I mean, in some cases, maybe even better because original hardware ages. As we
well,
all
that's
know.
what I'm saying, right? like these things need to be maintained. like you need to recap these things. You need to replace power supplies. You need to clean them. These things are not going to last forever, and these things will deteriorate, and you will start noticing buzzes and hums and distortions. And if you care about the video quality, like artifacts and ghosting in your video, these things, it's the flaws that we love sometimes, but they are going to keep creeping in. Yep. So having a modern digital and I guess more importantly maintained version that is buying some lifespan for this old hardware, keep it coming. So speaking of things being maintained and another loss. These things have been. Sorry, Discord is blurring again. The NES Power Pack, the thing that got me into any sort of hardware chip tune.
If you hold it in front of your shirt, I think it will not blur. Yeah.
There we go. There we go. I was hoping to get in the spotlight here, but no. Yeah, these things they have been officially and quietly discontinued.
It's really sad. I mean, that is literally like. I remember the very first thing I ever soldered was the 3 to 9 pin solder to let the expansion audio play. I opened up my NES. I remember, and I'm sitting there like literally sweating into the NES because I've never soldered anything in my entire life. And I kept have tweezers and I kept trying to put the 2 pins together or whatever. And then I remember just going over there and I could play Castlevania or Akabachi Densetsu with the VRC6, and it was the greatest thing that ever happened in my entire life. Great moments.
I have my NES Power Pack was apparently an early batch that had some issues where they're a little defective, where the graphics glitch out a little bit. And I still have it in that state, and it's completely my bad because he offered to fix it for free if you send it to him, and he was fixing it for people, and I just didn't stand because I was mostly using my Power Pack for music. It was fun to play ROMs on the console, but a lot of times when I want to check out game ROMs too, I'm happy to fire them up in an emulator. So it wasn't the biggest thing for me. But yeah, so I have a janky Power Pack where the graphics are a little glitched. Maybe if I'm selecting a song, some of the characters are just have some distortions on them, and it's my Power Pack's in a kind of janky state, unfortunately. But I don't know, it's kind of funny to have this weird early batch slightly defective Power Pack, but it works perfectly for music still. So hey,
does anybody have the EverDrive? What is it, the N8 Pro? That one has an NSF player.
No, I was going to mention that as the current successor or the current replacement for these things. I haven't played around with one myself. I don't own one, but it seems up to speed and capable. It does. I believe it does support NSFs, and I believe it has a probably even a better support for expansion audio. I think there's been work to give VRC7 support to that flash card.
Oh, wow.
And it also has adjustable mixing. So I believe there's a software menu that you can go in and tweak the expansion audio output levels, which is something that the Power Pack lacks. I can't speak to the fidelity and the accuracy. Now, that being said, the Power Pack isn't the most accurate either, and I have an example to demonstrate that later on in the show. Okay. But from what I understand, yeah, it's a suitable replacement. I don't have the same nostalgia for it though. I've had this card now for I want to say 12 years, and it's. I don't think without this piece of hardware being a thing, I don't think I'd be as passionate as I am now. And it's still my go-to workhorse. I still use it for a lot of my chiptune work. I still use it for a lot of my hardware recording work. So, yeah, rest in peace, Power Pack.
Yeah,
We got a
that's
couple of comments in
end
the
of an era.
chat saying that EverDrive N8 has not great NSF support. So
Aw.
that's a bummer. I hope they will improve it, but
That's a bummer then, because like, well, I guess that means there is no true replacement for people who are using the power pack for that aspect.
Yeah.
Ugh. Oh, well.
I guess you could go back to the dark ages of like converting your NSF to a .NES ROM, but that's like, come on, who wants to do that?
Nobody.
Right, exactly.
I mean that's like NSF files are essentially NES ROMs anyway, but like it's just getting it to work with the FPGA hardware that's on the flash card is probably the tricky part and requires some subject matter expertise that I don't have, and I wouldn't say. I think it's probably a rare thing in some of these communities. So we might be limping along without proper hardware support for NSFs for a while.
Yeah, it's kind of scary.
Verniak mentioned the what's it called, the PC Engine, the EverDrive Turbo, which I have. Which unless you can get like the right kind of file, I'm pretty sure that it's still borked on Devilmask for the export for it. I've tried many times to play PC Engine things back on it, despite having the right thing. So I think the export from Devilmask, at least, I haven't tried it on Furnace Tracker if anyone's tried to fix it, but it still doesn't, like, you can't use, it'll work, but you can't use any samples. You can't use any, like, most of the features you want to use, right? The most amazing part about TurboGrafx is you can use, like, every channel for pretty much everything. It's like open box, right? And you can't do that. You can't even use, like, any samples. You can use the noise channels and everything else. And I think you can do the FM, but it's not supported as far as I know. The way at least it comes off at Devilmask. But you can play the I think HES files, is it, if I recall correctly? If you do have one of those, it should play back correctly, but just not the Devilmask export. So, which is disappointing.
I see in the chat, Tasty Snacks 12 mentioned that there's a new NSF hardware player in the works, like similar to the HFC3. Thanks for jogging my memory on that. I think I remember seeing some prototype circuit boards and mock-ups on GitHub a while back. I forget who was doing that, so hopefully someone in the chat can fill us in. But yeah, I believe someone was basically making an open source replacement type thing that allowed you to play back NSF files using actual Famicom carts as they kind of like donor hardware. So if hopefully that comes to fruition, because one of the
I remember this now. Yeah, sorry, so much has happened, man.
So one of the criticisms I levy against the HFC3 and like the other hardware of its ilk, you can't get them. Like, they're impossible to find these days. Like, I remember a couple maybe about a year ago, Steve, you sent me a Yahoo Auctions Japan link for one that was going up, and at the time I couldn't justify it, but like, these things are like unicorns. You never spot them anymore. So if you're hoping to get into like the NSF or get NSF playing on hardware, and you're looking to get one of these, I mean, you have to constantly pay attention because buying one.
And to that point, even though, like, and Jeff, we've actually like tried out using the hardware. It's not the cleanest version of the hardware anyway. It does have like some artifacts and some issues, right? Like when we've sent recordings back and forth, it's not completely clean compared to just physically going in there and doing it yourself. Right? Like, I think that was what our decision was when we were looking at certain kinds of things we were passing back and forth.
Yeah, you're referring to some of the gimmick audio that you sent me, I believe.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I have a different explanation for that now, I think. So I don't know if I'd pin the blame squarely on that hardware anymore.
Okay.
Interesting, right?
I mean, we'll get to that when we talk about that. But, I was literally sitting here, like, I have it. It's like, I don't know. My desk is a freaking mess. I haven't like packed up. Like, I just moved, so none of my stuff is like where it's supposed to be. Usually, it's like right over here, and I can pick it up and shake it around, but it's not. There's a lot of NSXs over here, but the like thinking about the I was kind of like down on it because like I thought when we had the audio, I was like, oh man, it's not that great. It has a hum. I'm disappointed. Like like that kind of thing.
No, I think I have a different explanation for that now, and we'll get into that. Maybe that's a good segue into talking about the recording work for Gimmick that I was working on.
Yeah.
let's go there. Yeah, let's go with that.
Yeah. All right. So I guess this was about a year ago now. Actually, no, it would have been before that because I think it was in like January of 2022. I was approached by Ship to Shore Phonoco about doing a soundtrack release for the Famicom game Gimmick. It's one that we like all of us.
Oh, we lost him.
Oh no, we lost him. While we're waiting for him to come back, yeah, Gimmick. I'm super stoked. There's a re-release coming out. I'm probably undercutting him by like mentioning that, but it's already public. Yeah, there's a Gimmick re-release coming out soon, and Jeff's involvement with this is really cool. So, yeah, hopefully he'll be back in a moment.
I love the face he's frozen on too. It's great. It's like a YouTube reacts face. Just put like some big bubble letters next to it. Gimmick, the story behind Gimmick.
Oh man. Yeah. So, unrelated to that, I guess I'll try to fill a dead air with some stuff. Yeah, a bunch of the Sunsoft games are getting re-releases, and I'm super stoked for that. My friend Audie Surly from Norway is involved with the production of like the Trip World re-release, which I didn't know that there was like Sunsoft had this announcement trailer, and like halfway through the video, like he pops up on screen to talk about it, and I'm like, oh, Audie, like, oh my god, this rules. That like these games are getting these like special edition re-releases where like there's a plushie of Yumataro from Mr. Gimmick. There's a plushie of the main character. I'm forgetting his name from Trip World, and it's just like it's ridiculous that this is even happening, and I'm super thrilled about it.
It's cool too because like a lot of the stuff behind the scenes that I've been hearing is that like people like the Sunsoft team is very excited that people are interested in this stuff years later, and it's really I think a lot of that has to do with people approaching Kageyama-san or Kage-san about this work, and a lot of the work with Brave Wave and other folks that are kind of restirring that interest in Sunsoft. So it's really interesting. Okay. I think we're getting Jeff back here, but it's just been interesting because like some companies are a little bit more close to the vest about their IPs and how they're releasing things, and Sunsoft has been very forthcoming and really is embracing this. It seems like it's like a renaissance of respect for their old work, which is so cool.
Cool. So we just pivoted to talk about general Sunsoft re-releases that are on the horizon. But yeah, we'll let you take the helm here again.
I apologize. Discord just crashed, and I had no idea that I was talking to nobody. So I have no idea how far I got into that little spiel I was on to. But yeah,
just the beginning. It was
of course. So yeah, Ship to Shore approached me about working on this back in January of last year. And when they first mentioned that they were approaching Sunsoft about Gimmick, I couldn't be more excited. Like, it's a soundtrack that we're all, pretty passionate about. I mean, we did, you guys did that episode a couple, I think maybe just after I did the hardware recording episode with you guys, deep diving into the soundtrack. I know you guys love it. I love it. And when they approached me about doing the soundtrack recording, I'm like, okay, I have to do this right. And luckily, Ship to Shore was actually kind enough to fund a purchase of the cartridge for me. So I own my own slightly rattly copy of Gimmick now. So how did we get from this guy to, hopefully this doesn't get blurred out, this guy? I opted to record directly from the cart and not use any sort of NSF playback, because one of the things I discovered was I had played Gimmick before. I've listened to the soundtrack before, but I mostly played with this guy. Mm-hmm. The Sunsoft 5B emulation on this is not as good as I thought it was. And if anybody here is, this is one of those things you're not going to be able to unhear. If you're only familiar with this soundtrack through the Power Pack, you might be a little bit disappointed. So, Def, I sent you an audio sample for this. So it's the Gimmick Power Pack recording. So this is actually a recording that I made for myself, back when I got the Power Pack back in whatever year this was, probably like 12 years ago. And I thought it was great. I thought it sounded great. But pay attention to the backing chords, like the staccato chords that are there coming from what would be the Sunsoft 5B. Like pay attention to what those sound like.
All right, here we go.
So yeah, that's actually the recording that I made, a decade ago for my Power Pack, and that was like my go-to version of the soundtrack until I, sat down to listen to this and study this a little bit more in depth. Those volume envelopes on those chords on the 5B are completely wrong, like disastrously wrong, and I'm actually kind of ashamed that it took me like a decade to notice it. So if you listen to what the actual hardware sounds like and what the average emulator other than the Power Pack sounds like, those have a much more pronounced sound, we'll say. So you can get into the Famicom example.
Yep.
So they're much punchier sounding. Like the envelope is like a lot sharper. They don't sound quite as dull. I feel like I kind of wish I knew the exact technical reason. I see some chat in the YouTube comments right now. Some people are saying that it's supposed to be logarithmic, not linear. And yeah, that might explain the differences. Maybe it's a poor implementation in the Power Pack. But yeah, either way, like I said, I'm kind of ashamed that it took me a fucking decade to notice this in a soundtrack that I purported to love, So yeah, one of the things that, like I said, I recorded from the actual cartridge. I recorded from like the actual sound test. One of the, I guess, quirks from this would have been, though, is that there's two songs that are missing, sort of one and a half, well, maybe one and a quarter.
Mm-hmm.
So the track "Evidence of My Life" is not present in the sound test, and there's an alternate version of, I think it's is it Cadbury, the one that has the strong drum fill intro.
Yes.
Both of those that has an alternate version present in the game that's literally the same track, just doesn't have the intro. But again, not accessible from the sound test. So that's where this wonderful toy from Gloob, Camerica, whatever, came into play. It's just blurry, it's censoring again, but yeah, it's a Game Genie. I worked out some Game Genie codes to restore those back to the sound test. So here's a live exclusive for you guys. So if you want to put "Evidence of My Life" back into the sound test, use code LXOPXSIU. And if you want to put the alternate Cadbury back into place, it's ZEOPUITE.
I can hear the sound that makes when you do that.
So.
Yeah.
Oh wait, when I recorded all this audio, I actually left a continuous recording playing, so I actually captured that too. I should have saved that. I should have sent that to you guys. I still have it somewhere, I'm sure.
Blurry, the blurry effects and everything.
The cursor moving around, yeah.
It's so great. It's so great.
If you remember from our Capcom episode, we were very, very lucky that Sunsoft didn't program their games incorrectly. Because the Game Genie distorts the audio of all Capcom games before like Mega Man 3. I forget, Verniak would know the exact turning point. Somewhere in that ballpark. I remember if it's Mega Man 3 or like a Chippendales or something. But
so yeah, that's something I did a little bit of a dive into once to research myself. You can actually correct that with a Game Genie code. So
get out of here. Okay.
It's I think it's just to make sure that the Game Genie, when it makes those god awful rising pitch sounds when you enter characters, it sets the pulse wave sweep register and forgets to reset it. So games that don't reinitialize it. So as I'm saying, every game before Mega Man 3, every game that forgets to reinitialize it sounds like ass after using a Game Genie. But I think there's a Game Genie code that you can use that will it's specific to each game, so you have to kind of do a little bit of reverse engineering work to do it. But yeah, it's possible to correct that. So yeah, that's our tangent for tonight. Or one of the many tangents for tonight.
That's completely wild.
If you put a code in, does it make all the music have moon jumping?
So
99 lives.
So one of the other quirks from recording from hardware, and this is something that you guys didn't touch on in your Sunsoft 5B episode, and I don't know if it's something that was like widely known about the Sunsoft 5B and some other audio expansion hardware, but the chip actually has an audio amplifier built into the circuit. So it's not just a passive resistive mixer that you'd find in some of these cartridges, like you find some of these expansion hardware, and it's not just the Sunsoft 5B audio that passes through that amplifier. It's the whole mixed Famicom audio. So it's the audio gets sent through the Famicom cartridge connector from the 2A03 up into the cartridge connector into a resistive mixer circuit, and then into this amplifier. And this amplifier, I mean, to put it as politically correct and gently as I can say this amplifier is not linear. In other words, it kind of sounds like shit.
Gotcha.
It distorts the audio pretty significantly. And I don't think you would really notice it unless you actually took the time and effort to bypass it. I mean, you can notice some differences between emulation and the hardware too, but I mean, oftentimes people will chalk that up to emulation accuracy and all that. But no, there's this hardware component that colors the sound a significant amount. I mean, it does kind of contribute to a bit of a crunchy sound that the game is kind of known for. Like, it makes the DPCM in particular have this extra grit and bite to it. But I mean, like, when you're working on something like a soundtrack recording for an album release, like it's probably not desirable to have this extra distortion. It's basically like working with this. It's basically working with a mastered copy of the album or of the soundtrack that already has the compression and limiting already dialed up to yeah. So I did a presentation a couple of months ago, and I compared it to it's like a Metallica album. It's like the gimmick was a victim of the loudness war. Like so
I mean, that's very interesting to me. So is it just that it's the actual chip and then there's just something that's like on the side of it, or is it the chip itself that's doing it?
It's embedded into the chip itself. Now, it's probably like a discrete element. I think it was Rain Warrior in the NESDEF forums that was working on trying to characterize it a little bit more. And they were trying to figure out, what combination of hardware could result in the sound that we're getting here, because it's like to compare it to like a modern compressor sound. Like it's like a soft knee compressor with an immediate release. Like it's kind of hard to describe it unless you like really sit down and listen to it. But it like the end result is the audio gets kind of compromised and kind of distorted. And so, Steve, that's what I believe is actually the cause of like this distortion that I was hearing in the audio samples that you got from me from your recording.
Interesting.
So I'm wondering if the Sunsoft 5B was still completely in the audio path in the recordings that you were giving me.
So that's really interesting. So then if you use the HFX, right, which is the expansion board, there's a built-in YM2149 or whatever on there, or 2149F. Yeah. That 2149F is not the same as the 5B? It's not. No. Would it have it? It wouldn't have that. Okay. No, so would that theoretically be cleaner than the if you recorded it off there versus if you recorded it off the 5B?
I would imagine so. Yes. I mean, I'm speaking without having done the comparisons and seen the hardware myself, but I would imagine just
this is an episode,
right? Or at least one of those like little like supplemental episodes. It's kind of like the expansion pack episode for the Sunsoft 5B. So I've looked into this just a little bit casually. I believe the MMC5 and I think even maybe the VRC7. I think I saw a reference to this in one of the NAS databases that exists. Those also have audio amplifier circuits as a part of the chip itself. So it literally has an audio input pin and an audio output pin that takes the mixed audio, amplifies it. Perhaps in some cases it could be biased to be just a buffer, but it's going to color the sound to a certain extent. And I'm really curious to know. Like, I haven't done the in-depth research into this. I kind of only had to do it for gimmick, and I kind of focused my efforts on that. But I'm really curious to know if anybody has really gotten in to see, like, do these other circuits color the sound? What happens if you bypass them? Is there anything that can be learned and gleaned and to understand how these are working like on an internal level? And is there anything that can be that we can do to clean up the audio that we get out of these things? So for this gimmick recording, like I said, I mentioned I bypassed this amplifier completely. Fairly easy to do. I mean, like these things all use through-hole components. So basically all you had to do is depop a resistor, and you can tap the signal off of where that resistor would go. So you're basically taking the audio at the input of this amplifier and taking it out of the circuit so it doesn't contribute any noise. Because like that's the other thing that I could mention too. The Sunsoft 5B, because like you're passing the audio, literally like all of the mixed audio through this, couples in a decent amount of noise. Like you get this constant buzzing noise coming from all the audio passing through it, and bypassing the amplifier cuts down on that a lot, like significantly. So
it's so interesting. It's like, if that's something that like we're, it's kind of another frontier, like, the version of the audio before and after it having to go through that. So that like one of my theories and thoughts was like, and just colloquially, that I always thought that the MMC5 pulses sounded just a little different than the 2A03 pulses. And it's like always been my, like, am I hallucinating that or something? Like, especially when I do it I'll put two MMC5 things in there. I'll throw it onto, onto the, what's it called? The TNS HFC3. And it's like, it doesn't sound exactly the same way that I did it that way. It's either louder or like more like something to it. So I've always wondered about that, and like now, I just assumed like that they put the chips there and it just went through, right? The pin, there's like end to end chip to the system, nothing like crazy in between.
That was honestly like my understanding as well, and it wasn't until I did like a deep dive into actually having the hardware, like trying to figure out why this sounded the way it did, that I kind of like, I wouldn't say that I discovered this, like this is not. And I maybe independently stumbled upon it or like relied on other people's research. Because like I mentioned, Rain Warrior on the NAS Dev forums. Sorry, getting the too many acronyms. When I was looking into this, I found that he had already done, like a couple of years ago, had done quite a bit of research into characterizing both the amplitude effect and the frequency response of this amplifier. And like Rain Warrior, you get like all the gold stars, all the praise that I can give you, like the level. Yeah, the level and attention to detail this guy puts into his research is unparalleled. So yeah. So I did provide an audio sample for what it sounded like after bypassing this amplifier. The thing is, like, it's the differences, even comparing it to the Famicom example, like the one that we played earlier. They're kind of subtle, and it's actually maybe easier to tell visually when you look at the waveform. Anybody who's done some audio work before, like if you've experimented with compression and audio mastering kind of thing, it's like I described earlier. It looks like the unmodified cart looks mastered. Like it's more compressed. The peaks are not as sharp.
Is this that image that you sent?
Yeah. So I provided.
We can.
Yeah. You can put those up.
Yeah. Here we go.
I can't see what you guys are seeing on the stream now, so I'm hoping you're seeing the right ones. But yeah, if you look at the what I'm assuming is the bottom waveform, you can see there that the peaks from the DPCM in particular, like the drum hits, are noticeably higher in amplitude relative to like the body of the waveform. And yeah, it's for emulation and accuracy purposes. Yeah, you probably want to try to emulate or approximate the sound of that amplifier. But for a soundtrack album where it's going to be, you're taking a recording and you're going to be mastering it for a format, you're going to be like applying your own processing to tweak it for, a desirable, enjoyable audio release. Like your goals are different. So working towards getting a cleaner hardware recording with as little coloring as possible was my goal for doing that. So yeah. Do you guys want to take a break and listen to some music? We can probably listen to one of the recordings that I provided.
Sure.
Yeah, it'd be fantastic. I just wanted to interject real quickly, though.
Oh, sure.
You said that these modifications were like relatively easy, but just to like put this back in the context, you are doing this to a gimmick cartridge.
Yeah, right.
Like,
so
like that is kind of scary in some ways.
Yeah, so I got this cartridge in the mail from Japan on whatever day this was. This was probably about a year ago. It was probably like May or April of 2022 that I got this in my hands, and literally the day it arrived, I was experimenting and doing audio recordings. I'm like, this sounds too bad to use. Like, I need to get this better. And started looking up YouTube tutorials on how to open up Famicom cartridges right away.
Yeah, I would be so terrified to do that.
I was like sweating. Like I'm getting goosebumps now. Like my hair is standing on end thinking about it. Like it was not like I'm relatively confident with a soldering iron, but like it's not you don't want to do this to a cartridge that like costs like $700 and like to replace would be like I feel like I got that for a good price, right? Like these things are not cheap and not easy to come by.
Yeah, is that the going price these days? Is that like 700 even without the box and everything? It's like
that was at the time I was searching. I probably was looking for like a period of like 2 or 3 weeks, and this was the best deal I could find.
Yeah,
Man,
yeah.
I paid a lot less for it. Wow, that's like double what I paid, and I have box and all the manuals and inserts. Yeah. It was like when I was in Japan, I guess with Alex Maurer like a million years ago. The going rate was anywhere between like 30,000 to 40,000 yen. And I saw one that was like mint perfect for like 51,000 or something like that. It's crazy.
I see in the chat there, Tasty Snacks is saying that explains the rattle. I deliberately never fully assembled it properly. I deliberately never put it back together just in case I needed to open it up again and do anything. That's an intentional rattle. It's still completely functional, but I just left it there just in case I needed to go back and do any extra work. Thankfully, thankfully the recording that I got was good, and everybody approved it. So yeah, that's how we got from the cartridge to the vinyl record. So yeah, let's play one of the recordings I made. I think I picked out 2 tracks. I forget which ones I gave you.
It's like Identity Believer and Sophia Take 2.
All right, so
excellent.
Yeah, I just gotta pick those out at random just because they're personal favorites of mine.
Cool.
So yeah, put on any one of those. All right, enjoy the music.
See you shortly. Where? Oh, I have to actually start the audio. And we're back.
So yeah, that's some of the, for anybody who's not familiar with that soundtrack, that is probably, like, if I had to pick like top 3 NES soundtracks right now, I would have a hard time putting that one anywhere but number 1. Best, like, some of the best compositions, some of the best arranging for the NES in my view. And yeah, I mean, sure, it's helped by the expansion audio, sure, but even without that, the compositions themselves are just top tier.
Oh yeah, I should plug too, because it's something that, because we did a whole episode on Gimmick before, but something I actually made since then on my Illusory Wall channel, which is ostensibly all about like Dark Souls and stuff. I was planning on making a series called Retro Games Dissected, and then I only made one about Mr. Gimmick. I'll probably I will get back to that series eventually, or reboot it in some form. But like, yeah, if you haven't seen it before and you're interested in learning more about Gimmick, I just did this long video that like it opens up with like a history of the game, just like sort of explaining what it is, and then it goes to like a long play where I don't talk over the game for the most part. I do pause every now and again to point out a few things, but I sort of do like a subtitled thing where I just point out a bunch of stuff. And the sound design of Gimmick, again, it's something that we probably talked about it in the episode. I definitely talked about it in the video, but one of the sound design elements that was really fascinating to me is like in the second stage, there's one part where there's some seagulls in the background, like way distant, these little, and it's not like NES sprite seagulls, like typical. It's like, no, it's like these little like single pixel for like the head, probably like into these little curved lines for the arms. Something visually you don't really see on the NES very often, but you can hear them chirp every now and again. And I was like, okay, that's cool. What did they do for that? And the example I used is like if you're playing a game like Super Mario Brothers, the jump sound effect will be kind of obtrusive over the music. When you're playing the game, you don't really stop to think about it that much. It's not that interruptive to the experience, but you play a game like a later NES Mega Man game, and you charge up the Mega Buster, and it just ruins the music because it's a wall of sound that, eats up one of the sound channels. And like Gimmick to me is one of the coolest examples of just handling that as delicately as possible, because like of all the sound channels that seagull sound effect could have interrupted, they chose one voice that was used mostly for a subtle echo effect on a melody. So they basically said, hey, what's the least important channel that could be interrupted here? And it's a really neat example of clever like Famicom and NES sound design of like the people who were making Gimmick were firing on all cylinders, and they cared deeply about the thing that they were making. And it shows in every aspect of its design, from the graphics to obscure audio details.
I think what we should do, like just as a secondary example of that, is create here. Here we go. Here, my son's over here. Yes, what is it, Alex? Sorry. Hold on 1 second. But what I was going to say is that what we should do is go through Mega Man 4, the entire OST, with just the charging Buster sound, and just release it.
That was the one thing and it's like common sense in retrospect, but like Mega Man 9, when that came out, they changed, as much as it kept things intact, and they even reused like some Mega Man 2 music for like the menus and stuff like that, and a lot of the sound effects were the same. The Mega Buster charge up sound was shortened, so it was just like a charge up and then it stops, and it's like because they knew that the music was too important to have that sound effect carry over. So it's really fun. I'd be curious if anyone's made ROM hacks of like Mega Man 4 through 6 where like the Mega Buster just shuts up after a couple seconds. So that would be great.
Someone should. So
I guess this is a perfect illustration of the general sort of things that crop up when trying to do a podcast.
I haven't had any peace and quiet or uninterrupted time. This I just went down like when we were playing the music to just make sure that he was doing okay, my son, and like just congratulating him on like not interrupting the stream. Just because I told him like it's very important, don't interrupt the stream, and then the second I do that, he just gave me interrupted. So it's fine. It's just that's why it's good to like the streams are the streams. I think you too. Like when we've done any other streams for like releases, well, I've had plenty of interruptions. So
this is a great change of pace from like the heavily scripted stuff that we were doing before for the podcast. Like this is nice. This is like relaxing.
This is what I was thinking. Like and like partially like the future of the channel and whatnot. Like this element of having a live chat because we can all chat about this stuff and it's a lot of fun, almost like a news time or something like that, should be a continuing part of the show. Like we should definitely do this every once in a while to sit down and just chat.
I gotta
It's a lot
say,
easier than
it's just like no editing. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
the best thing about doing it this way. You know, it's like warts and all, but just no editing.
Yeah, and like a lot of the stuff we bring up is like it's kind of like Patrick, when we used to do a lot of those side conversations would show up when we were recording episodes, which would then just make it into the podcast anyway, because the side conversation was super interesting versus what we actually thought we were going to talk about.
Yeah, I put a lot of effort into scripting to make the script sound natural. It's like really embarrassing, actually. If I could like show the audience like what some of those scripts look like it's not at the level of like writing in the script or anything, but like, you know, there's stuff in there where it's like, it's so like a PowerPoint presentation, right? Because we're doing a podcast where we have to share lots of audio examples. So it's unlike other podcasts, like where people can do things more off the cuff. They know they may have a checklist of things they're going to talk about. It's like, oh no, we have a very specific like, and then this is this audio sample for this for that. Like, it was like so pre-scripted to an extent that it's just like, I don't know. It became kind of like tough to wrangle.
The scripts would be very difficult because we'd have so much we'd want to talk about, and we'd make sure that we put it all in there, and we'd go through the history of things, we go through the audio examples, but also like you can only imagine if we were trying to do some of the heavier lifting we were trying to do without a script, it's like we're trying to describe a textbook, right? Because a lot of what we were doing was a straight up academic, like a flow of a story from here's the chip, here's what it does, And I remember there were a couple episodes that we didn't script as much, and it took us like twice as long to do it. Because like, oh god, we forgot about this part, so now we have to go back and re-record this because we didn't talk about it in this context. So, but at the same time, making the script is probably the most exhausting part of doing it. I mean, the editing is too, but the script itself, like we, sometimes won't remember. Go way back to the beginning. We were doing this weekly. We were releasing one every single week.
I don't know how we started doing that. I can't, absolutely ludicrous that we tried that for a while.
I think we got like 12 episodes that way too. Like we actually got pretty far. And it was always like we'd have an episode that was really hardcore, then one that might just be us playing a soundtrack, and then one that's like really hardcore, and like we were kind of going back and forth. And then we felt really bad when we're like, oh, we can only do one every 2 weeks now.
And then immediately didn't take too long for it to fall off after that, because it's just like
I mean, the other thing too is it's like I look at it at some of our old episodes, which I think like if I was to think about audio right now, I think I'd still have to re-listen to my own episodes because it's been so long since we did a lot of that heavy research. I think a lot of it's just kind of not here anymore. Mm-hmm. But the idea of what we did was more like to be an encyclopedia of this knowledge, as opposed to being like just like a fun like live show or something. So and so I think that's the value that all of that work did, is it created like an audio book about each of these different kinds of topics. Whether we are right or wrong, which I know there's plenty of things that if I could go back, I'd fix what we said. Which that's another thing I'd love to do for the podcast in general at some point is to just go back and make some fixes if there's any that we can. I think there's a couple episodes where we were just wrong.
Hey, it happens. That's the nature of like, because there's so much original research involved for the stuff that we did. Like, I think back to like the Famicom Disk System episode, and like I'm out here just like pulling the FDS instruments from games and just like making a big pack of them and just looking at them, trying to understand like what types of FDS instruments were actually made for these games back in the day. How did they work? It's not like I could go to a wiki to like be like, oh yeah, it was normal for games to have 8 instruments made for the FDS, or is 12 a high number? It's like you don't know that until like you just do like really dig into that stuff yourself. So we did a lot of original research on just trying to understand these things, but that also puts you in a situation where you didn't get to thoroughly check out the entire library of stuff or whatever, and you make mistakes, and me especially too. I'm like, I don't know, I feel like I'm a caveman trying to understand the stuff sometimes, because I'm not the most technically minded person here, and that puts me in a
But
funny.
I think that was always our point, right? Like we are two people who aren't the most like electrical engineering type people, and
Yeah.
trying to look at it from the perspective that we bring, which
Mhm.
is music and love of all of this. Because there are definitely podcasts out there that are super more technical than we are, and
Yeah.
ours was more trying to approach it from the perspective of, and I always thought of like kind of like teaching, right? We're
Yeah.
opening the
Yeah.
discussion, and there's plenty of people like Plog and who just could like just put you
Yeah.
awash with all the technical stuff. But ours was more like to just kind of introduce it and to talk a little bit about how the actual music worked, and et cetera, et cetera,
Mhm.
with a healthy dose of trying to explain certain things, like our FM episode trying to explain the what's it called, that we couldn't find any explanation for, the SSG engage, or what is it, whatever that,
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
the
which I then so I tried to explain it there, and if you go and look it up now, it's our explanation now,
Oh no.
which was terrible. Like,
Yeah.
someone
That-
copy and
that's
pasted
scary.
our
Yeah.
explanation in there, so it was just scary because I still can't tell you what it does. I
Well,
press the button and it does something. It makes it sound cool, and there's a couple I can move the bar and it'll sound really nice. Like
yeah.
maybe it's like
Perfect example of like inserting ourselves into these types of things and like it having to be corrected later on is I think I was one of the first people to make a list of Famicom games that used sound expansion, which is really weird to think about. That there was a point in time where there wasn't a resource for that. So just on the NES Dev forums, I was like, here's all three VR6 games. Here's every FDS game that actually uses the expansion audio in music tracks, not just sound effects, that I could find at the time. I'm sure it's woefully incomplete. And like, I think the Namco sound expansion, we talked about how like people previously named it the wrong thing. That was me too, to a big extent, because I mean I didn't make up the number out of thin air, but like I just read what someone else called it or what some emulator at the time called it, and then just put it in that list. And that's the type of thing like, oh, when people are looking up sound expansion soundtracks, they see my list, it has the wrong name on it, and it's just like stuff like that's really, really easy to happen when you're just trying to research the stuff yourself, but you don't have official sources. You don't have like, you're just winging it as you go, basically.
I just like, yeah, and like, so the funniest thing about this, and we've talked about this on the podcast, but it's also really funny that originally I was running a blog where I talked about audio on video games and stuff, and my source for the stuff that I posted was Patrick, but I didn't know who Patrick was. So there's and Patrick was in Philly at the time, and I was in Philly, and we didn't know each other existed. But all of my videos were like, 2A03, the Explode 2A03 or Explode 2A03 says this, and that's probably where the sound comes from. That the other problem with that is that website still exists, where I fumbled in the dark in like 2012 to try to come up with some of this stuff, and I get all these people being like, "Well, actually, it's like, yeah, okay, man, it's like 11 years old. I should just take it down." Like, like I was pretty accurate for the information I had at the time, right? But all these people keep coming in and just saying like, "Well, you said that this has 7 channels," and it's like, I know, but like, look at when this information was sourced. Like, why is this coming up at the beginning? It's a blog. And then like the worst part is like a lot of that stuff is, and a lot of the stuff that I wrote, it was academic, what's it called, classical gaming was at my old blog, which is still up there. Please don't read it. I at some point I'm going to go and fix it, but there are some good. I did write some good articles about particular composers and stuff, and doing some research. Like I think the one that gets the most hit is H. Kingsley Thurber, who was the composer for Captain Novolin. And then apparently, but like, there's no other research on him, so I did like a deep dive into who the heck he was. And I guess like he wrote some music for like some weird, maybe even D series horror movies, and also he like worked on Mortal Kombat as like one of the sound developers, because the studios that made Captain Novolin were also part of Midway Acclaim, technically, or a lot of them moved over there. Because I think some of those healthcare games, I can't remember, the Novo Nordisk games or whatever, actually had like some of the composers from that stable of composers from Midway. Like not, I can't remember the dude's name, not Trammell, Trumbull. whatever. So one of those guys. Yeah, Jack Trivial. No, but it was So it's interesting. Just some of that stuff's correct, but like, man, don't go read my Genesis article, please. Don't go read my Mega. But I mean, but like, we put this stuff out there, so I constantly like, and I really should just take it down. I constantly see people sourcing what I wrote on my blog, maybe 12 years ago at this point, for some kind of paper. Like, Patrick, have you seen that? Like retro game audio like ends up in a lot of like academic research papers and stuff, like quoting exactly what we said. I'm like, oh my god, we're the source. Like, how did we get to be the source? Like, holy crap! I just Googled stuff, man.
On one hand, it's cool being the source because, like, I'm proud of the original research that I put into some things. Like, just me like making, when I do something, like talk about like, oh, this game has like kind of an unusually large amount of space dedicated to its DPCM samples. The only reason I'm able to know that is because I just dumped samples from like a ton, like dozens and dozens of games, like, but there's not like documented information on a lot of that stuff. So yeah, it's a funny thing to explore, navigate, and then before you know it, people are like citing your quote unquote research, but my research is like not formatted very academically. So it's just funny to see that happen, just like me writing it on a blog or mentioning it in a podcast,
I think what we did, and like what I'm proud of with a lot of the episodes, we opened up a lot of conversations, and I think we asked a lot of questions, and and I think that we tried to be very careful about stuff we didn't know about. We literally would say like, we have no clue, tell us, and that's how we developed relationships with David and a lot of people who are in the chat right now, because we literally came to it not like we are geniuses about this, but more so we have a curiosity for this, and I still do. Any information, I just want to absorb it. Like, just hearing about that freaking, that there's something blocked, literally, like mixing the path on the 5B. Like, I have 100 million ideas because I'm like, I didn't know that. I can't even believe I didn't know that. Like that's a huge finding. And like, that's so cool. I'm going to be thinking about that for a while in terms of like how I've been perceiving the soundtrack for years. And that's why we're here, because like we're interested in this stuff. We may not be right all the time, but we try our best to get what we can with what we can. And when we're corrected, and that's the thing that sucks about a podcast, you can't just go back and correct it. But when we're corrected, we know we're corrected. We Thanks for everyone for keeping us honest.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, we have I think we wanted to be done about 10:30 or so. So I think we should move on to the other topic we wanted to talk about today.
Yeah, sure. So it's another hardware recording project. This is actually one that Steve and I worked on pretty collaboratively, and it would not have been possible without Steve's assistance here. And that is, get to the props and watch Discord blurred again.
No.
The Dragon Slayer Legend of Heroes soundtrack album release.
I next time we do this, I need to make sure I have props. I'm like, all my props are like, they're like my. It's like, if I just,
yeah,
I don't really have anything here. But
next time we do this, I need a camera.
So yeah, this one happened. This project is maybe about a year and a half, 2 years old now. So our memories. Am I chopping out again, or?
You chopped out just a little bit. I was worried for a second.
Okay. I'm noticing that my Discord is just getting more stuttery as the call goes on. So I actually disconnected on purpose a moment ago. Hopefully that prevents me from getting chopped off mid-sentence this time. But yeah, that was that soundtrack album was something that we were approached to work on. I want to say maybe 2 years ago now. So my memory is a little bit hazy on some of the details. But yeah, it was one of the most challenging and like time-consuming recording projects I've had the privilege and pleasure of working on.
It's so interesting because, like, you approaching me for that soundtrack, I would say it's probably one of like my top favorite soundtracks. Like, it would only be trumped on, especially in like Japanese PC games, it would only be trumped by someone asking me to like record Zack or Yuna or something like that. Like it's up there for me. Like that, and the care that has to be done with certain things like this, because the versions of that soundtrack all suck.
Right.
Right. Yeah. like I listen to it all the time, because I'll listen to Translations channel and just kind of filter it for while I'm at work or whatever, and I'm always just like, this is not.
This is
It's
not
just
right.
not right. It's not right. And then you can go back to the perfect edition or whatever it was, the older version where that kind of weird world where everything sounds like it's playing off in like a concert hall with like the cheapest acoustics possible, and everything has reverb or so it sounds like it's from like a Turbo Duo game that only got a Japanese release. And so like there hasn't been any definitive way to listen to this, and I'll Jeff, I'll let you talk about it, but like there really hasn't been, because the VGM was not even correct.
Right. There's VGM rips online for this game that are sourced from the PC 98 port, and as best I can tell, like that port shipped with some corruptions and errors in the music. I mean, I'm relying on dumped discs here. I don't have like a first-hand copy to judge, but like when I was trying to trace down the cause of these errors that are in the circulating VGM rips, it's not the VGM rips that are wrong. It's the copy of the game that they were sourced from.
It's just incredible. Like that,
right.
Like we found a defect from a game that shipped 1996, 1995, something like that. We found an actual defect in that, and that's what was preventing us from doing the audio. So if you're following along at home, it gets more. This is just the beginning of the problems we had.
Yeah. You're tasked with producing the soundtrack to this, and you're just going back to the game, and you're like, the soundtrack isn't right in the game.
Right. Like the most accessible version of the game, like when I was like looking into it, like the one that's easiest to find online is the PC 98 port, and yeah, it's just got problems like insurmountable problems that are like well beyond my skill level and knowledge to repair. So took a lot of deep diving into some obscure like Japanese websites and Google Translate to find an actual like functioning PC 88 disk dump that I could work with. And even then, emulation is tricky. It's a pain to get running in a reliable state, and I spent like hours battling with like just weird configuration quirks and just getting this game to like run in a state that I could even hear what this music even was, not that it was supposed to sound like what the emulation was producing, but like getting it to play so I could hear something and tell if I was working with a viable copy of the game was a nightmare. So we ended up having to so the process kind of went something like emulate the game, log VGMs that were accurate to the game. We did zero polish, like we didn't set loop points or anything like that. We just literally logged continuous streams as if we were recording from the game. Mm-hmm. That process for an hour's worth of music, we'll say, like this is look at the timings on the vinyl here. It's about an hour or so of music. It probably took like 8 to 10 times that.
Yikes! Well, I should maybe provide some context to listeners real quick too on what the logging of VGM even is, because I was going to say a lot of classic video game music formats, stuff like NSF. And Mr. Norbert could explain this way more accurately than I possibly could, but you're doing some effort of like extracting music data in the ROM and recompiling it into a playable format. VGM is a bit different in that you can capture a stream of what gets played back, right? So it's sort of like reverse engineer, kind of player piano-esque, like everything that the sound chip does, everything that it outputs, VGM is just paying attention, like, oh, at this millisecond, this changed to that. These are the changes that happened. And so
you're logging a stream of register writes to the hardware. So you're trusting, in this case, an emulator that is emulating the game's music engine, playing back the music data, and as it is writing its registers to its virtual version of the sound chip, you are capturing that at an audio sample rate, basically, it's such that you can play that stream of register writes back, in this case, on a device that will convert those register writes into actual hardware writes and coax the hardware into playing the music. It's a bit almost like like a live recording or a live transcription going to piano roll kind of.
Yeah, right.
Whereas like an NSF rip is probably more along the lines of the actual sheet music and the person who is playing and interpreting the sheet music, I guess,
Right.
to trying to make that analogy. But yeah, getting those getting the game to work in a state that was rippable was painful. Like I ended up basically manipulating the game disk image to put various bits of the music data, like for the song I wanted to write, in the place of like the opening tune, so that I didn't have to play through the entire game and record audio from gameplay. And that was a lot of learning because I wasn't too familiar with PC-88 in general, and also a lot of trial and error. And yeah, painful. The process was painful, is what it was. And this is
the original opening, right? Was that the one that had like towards the end they would just beat the guy donk for no reason? Like one of the channels would just flush close, and you just hear this like donk
donk. Yeah. So the VGM rip that's online now on VGMrips.net from the PC 98 version of the game, one of the channels just gets completely trashed. Like towards the end of the opening tune, just drops out, and it just plays back corrupt data. Like I think someone has done like a bit of an analysis of what's actually happening there, and yeah, it's one of the channels completely gets corrupted. It gets replaced with garbage data, basically. But that's not
I think someone fixed that too, if I recall correctly. Someone had told me that they had fixed the VGM rip of it, but I'll have to double check.
Yeah,
I think they actually fixed it.
I did. I might have been talking with someone, and I did send them the rip that I made as a reference. I don't know if that got fixed on VGM rips, and I don't know if a fixed rip has been disseminated anywhere. But I know it's people are aware that it's wrong now, at least.
Yeah.
So that's not the only difference, though. I think it's one of the menu tracks in the PC 98 version of the soundtrack. It loops, and in the PC 88 version, it doesn't, and has like a distinct hard ending. It's actually like a completely unique ending to the song that is it just was not easily available other than the Perfect Collections CD soundtrack. So again, like this is a case where like the version that Steve and I were probably the most intimately familiar with had some pretty significant like oversights and errors, I guess. That
I remember you sending me that extra part, and I was just like, what? What is that like? And it's distinct. It's like it's an ending, and it wraps up, and it's distinct. It's not just like some wallpaper stuff. It's different than what you'd expect. Like it's new content. It's like 10, 15 seconds of like unheard, unless you had a PC 88 back in the day, content from a song that everyone knows. Like what the hell?
Yeah.
Like what the hell?
So I've actually there's one more bit about that same song too. So the Perfect Collection CD has a recording of the sound effect that plays after you confirm that you're creating the file. Getting that, my goal was to recreate the Perfect Collection CD like with pristine audio quality. Getting that chime sound effect was like I probably spent as much time on that 1 to 2 seconds of audio of getting that VGM rip for that as I did for the rest of the songs combined. And that's not an exaggeration. So I gave Def an audio sample here to play. I don't need to check which file it is.
Okay.
So what I want to point out is the one of the quirks, I guess, of the audio that we were replacing. So I need to pull up my Google Drive, but it's the one that I think I've labeled Falcom provided audio. I think I've labeled it as sample. I don't have the files in front of me, so I apologize.
User disk creation Falcom source?
No, it's not that one. It's probably the one I have numbered next after that.
Falcom source detail.
Yes, that one.
Okay. Yeah. Alrighty. All right. Go.
Yeah, that little ding ding, that little ding ding, was that took so fucking long to get logged properly, and I wish I was joking, but I wanted to get it right, so I put in the effort to get it right. But one thing I wanted to point out about that Falcom audio, the audio we're replacing, Steve mentioned it's got this reverb to it. Something I didn't really notice right away until I kind of like was like doing detailed comparisons with our audio. I suspect that's actually from a tape source, either a cassette tape or like a reel to reel. Because if you like listen to some of the dead spots in that audio, like the gaps between tracks, you can hear print through. You can hear, you can hear this the song that's coming next and the sounds that are coming next buried through. This is something that only happens like due to analog tape being part of the process. Like so, it's a decently high quality tape. So if I had to guess, it's not a cassette. It's probably like a studio grade reel. Like maybe like a proper like studio multi-track, but still like this would have been the audio source that we would be working with. Like, and it's just like, it's like, it wouldn't have been disappointing to use it, like, but it just would have been like super fascinating. Just the path that audio would have taken if they had ended up using that.
It's so funny because it's like and like this is not like we're finding some and pardon my language here, but we're not looking for some random H game from like a hentai game that was like produced in the Dojin shop that has kick-ass music that everyone loves that like you can't find single copies for. This is a well-received, well-sold game that is well respected in the community and everyone knows the soundtrack to. Yeah. And this is the shit we had to go through to get the music from. Like, yeah. Well, but it shouldn't be this hard.
But it also goes. It also like
should I show the image of the file list?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, but like, I think that the other thing that this illustrates is like that's the quality of archives that these companies maintain, right? Like that's
two last examples. God, please. No, come on.
This brings us to.
I give up after this.
So that brings us to headache number 2 of this recording process, which was actually playing back these VGM files on the actual like on Steve's MSX and Makoto hardware. We were plagued with interference coupling into the sound, and that's one of the quirks of doing this kind of work. Like I've experienced it so many times on like these other projects, and Steve got his baptism by fire when he was working on this.
I mean, those are the names that I put together on there. So that was like for my end of like what we were trying to do. And I guess the thing is we had to, so getting to the reason why we had used Makoto and MSX, we had VGM versions of these things, right? In terms of having S98 files or SA88 files or whatever we'd use to play it back, like neither of us has the hardware or expertise to actually understand what the hell happens with the PC88. Like I've imported a lot of computers. There's an X68K right here. There's an FM Town Smarty right here. There's a bunch of MSXs, but like I refuse to learn yet another system. Oh, like you're pointing at it right there.
I have a PC 9821 right behind me right now. Okay. I had to take the plunge for another project. So
yeah, but I just and so at the time it was just like, how can we do this with what we have? We had VGM files, so we can use something that plays VGM. Just so happens that we have an OPNA which can play OPN. So why don't we just do it this way? And this is the best way we can do it with the knowledge and the tech we have at the time. Which led to us making tons of recordings where I was literally pulling wires up to try to see if it would make less noise in the background because we're working with interesting tech. Like, I mean, this is like, this is a homebrew cart on a system. Like we changed, how many different MSXs did we use? Like 4 or 5 until we found one that sounded the best. Like
you tried at least 3 different combinations. You were trying different RAM expansion hardware. You were trying with the monitor on, off, connected, disconnected, trying different power supplies, trying everything. All to reduce like the background noise level from like minus like 50 dB to minus 52 dB. Like we're talking like the tiniest tiny details of correction. And like if you listen to the first test recording that you gave me and the last one, it's night and day difference. But I was going through them today, like you sent me like basically a half hour of a 5-second jingle repeated over and over and over again with different silences in between for me to check to make sure. Oh, this one's slightly better. This is slightly better. Oh, this one has a noise band at this frequency. Where is that coming from? It was like detective work in some ways, but also just like torture because like finding the pattern and finding like the correlation between what was causing the noise and where this noise was coming from and how like it was just excruciating.
Yeah, I think we ended up with I think I used an FSA1, right? So my red FSA1 Panasonic MSX2 and then we put the expansion cartridge on, right? Then we realized that if we put one of the RAM cartridges on, for whatever reason, the RAM cartridge stabilized the pitch. So we had to put what's it called? The MMM, the music module mapper, whatever the heck, I can't remember the name of it. It's the one that has the PSG on it. So we put that in there. Then we ran it, and then we just monitor on or off, right? So you had to set everything up. I'd have to queue up the in between, turn the monitor on and off to make sure I could pick the next track I needed to from the batch list. And I think the one time when I went to go do it, we set everything up. I sent you an example, and it was just this new hum we'd never heard of.
Right.
It was just there,
Right.
with the same setup. I hadn't moved anything. There's just a new hum. The hum's just and I'm like, oh great, cool, perfect. And so it's is it going to rain today? Is that why this is happening?
I see in the YouTube chat someone is saying, I think it's Dylan Tam is saying these guys out here attempted to create.
I was going to mention this too.
Create the most accurate sounding recording of a PC 88 soundtrack on an MSX. Yeah, I think this is probably torture of our own making here. But it's with the tools that we had at our disposal. And relatively low barrier to entry. I mean, that could be disputed now based on the efforts that we had to put into it. But also, I think the results show that, even despite the complications of the setup, this holds water. This is a definitive recording of the soundtrack, in my opinion. And we did have, with the flaws that it had, sure, we did have the Falcom audio to use as a reference, the past recordings. Those are legitimate hardware recordings from a legitimate PC 88. Reverb and background hum nastiness be damned. It's still trustworthy. And having that as a reference, having that as our baseline for accuracy, if you can spot a difference between that is intrinsic to the hardware that we used, between the Falcom recording and what we end up providing for this record, I would be flabbergasted, right?
Particularly the way that even the Makoto is set up is it's supposed to, if I recall correctly, and I'd have to ask Temu Tech or Temu about this, but I believe it's set up to either the PC98 or PC88 frequency, so it's gated exactly how it would be from one of those, in terms of how it's amped and everything. So it should sound, and the way that it comes out should be the exact same volume and mixing, from the LPNA that you would hear from the hardware itself. The MSX does whatever it needs to do to try to get it to work, obviously, but it should, I remember we had this long conversation, because if we were doing this on non-hardware, is it going to be noticeable that we're louder or softer or something like that because we were doing this? And he had purposely made sure that the output from the OPNA was, within 5 or 10% of what you'd get from the PC98. It doesn't even matter because eventually we'd have to mix it anyway. So everything there, it's a very simple unit, and it's just literally the chip being sent out. Kind of set up exactly the same way it should be. So that was a huge consideration, because obviously, in the chat, we're trying to do the most complicated MSX procedure of all time, and that's great because I love the MSX. But there'd be no point in doing this operation if the chip we were using did not exactly emulate it. And I would have been no, we're not going to do it then. We have to get a PC88, and or whatever, and it's fine to, the other thing too is I know there was concerns, even so, of using an OPNA to record OPN, right? Because it's the same exact chip basically in a lot of ways, right? OPN is OPNA is basically two OPNs. And I think circuitry wise, very similar. OPNA is often used to emulate OPN anyway. So, those were all considerations we made. We've had these conversations. I talked to David Plogue. I talked to everyone being okay, if we do this, am I doing something stupid? Right. First of all, everyone's you are, because it's an MSX. I know. Okay. That aside is what we're doing and putting out audio wise. Okay. you know, and and it was, and everyone basically agreed that yeah, well, what we're doing and how we're doing it at the highest technical level should be the best version of what we're doing here. And being able to use an MSX to bring up these VGM files and do all that stuff, yeah, we could use a PC80. We just did not have that. And so this is a bit, originally this is supposed to be a very easy operation because I could just play the VGM files back. And remember, we talked about this. You send them over. I'm like, yeah, I'll just record it. I record the whole thing for it, like immediately. And you're like, no, this is shit. There's something wrong with it.
Well, we also had conversations too about like the ethics of using someone else's VGM rips and using someone else's NSF rips, like in principle, like like how do we feel as people who are being commissioned to do these definitive hardware recordings, basically taking someone else's work wholesale, someone else's VGM rips? I mean, I know the process takes time and effort and knowledge and skill. Like, how do we feel taking their work and basically using it and in a format in a forum where they will not be credited, right? Like it's and in some cases, like if you go back to NSF rips in particular, like there are no credits for this. Like, how do you properly attribute that work? It's almost next to impossible, right? So I personally I feel better that as convoluted and complicated as this process was, I feel proud to say that we did it ourselves. We did it obviously we're standing on the shoulders of giants here. Like, we're relying on tools and knowledge that has been developed by like whole communities of people that, like, I mean, without them, this process would be like impossible. But like we still put in the work and the effort ourselves. I mean,
sorry, there's a comment from Tasty Snacks. It just says, can I take a moment to thank you guys for actually caring about these soundtracks? So many people would just say good enough and move on.
And they do.
Right. And they do. And they do.
They do.
Yeah, unrelated to the soundtracks you worked on, like, as a longtime Castlevania fan, man, I don't really like a lot of official Castlevania soundtracks. Just look to like the Game Boy soundtracks. Like, there's one of them where the music is faster than it should be, and part of me wonders if it was just like modified so it could all fit on a single tape or CD or something like that. Like, the playback speed isn't even right. There's just so many.
Is it like did they record it from a Super Game Boy? Like, because that's that's like a 2% speed increase, and like
that's probably
pitch.
it.
Yeah.
It could be, but I feel like I'll have to go back and look which one that was exactly. But yeah, there's just so many things where it's just like, or there's a bunch of reverb slapped on. We've complained about that to the nth degree in the past, but it's just like it was really sad and weird to me that, like, you can go to YouTube and look up one of my old Xplod 2803 uploads of like, you get like a Castlevania soundtrack, and like, even with YouTube compression,
it sounds better.
Yeah, my upload is better than like the official Castlevania soundtrack. And I didn't even do I just had like a basic Game Boy sound mod that I think Joey did for me, Animal Style. And it was just like, I took the GBS file that, again, someone else did all the work. Someone did a GBS rip of the soundtrack. I found a tool that converted GBS to .gb, so on a flash cart I could play the Castlevania soundtrack off the hardware. And I'm just like, but like, I'm a nobody who like doesn't really understand any of these technical processes. Just use a couple tools and files that other people had out there, and I'm just like, wow, I have a better Castlevania soundtrack than Konami. Like, this is really weird, right? And like, and I operate at a level that's way lower than everyone else in the community, I feel like. But it's just this kind of interesting world that we operate in, where like just a little bit of extra attention to detail puts us in the situations where it's like, yeah, we can get better versions of these soundtracks than have existed in the past.
Yeah, like you mentioned Castlevania, and like the Castlevania 1 soundtrack, as iconic as it is, has not had a definitive official release, and it's embarrassing. It's like, it's shameful how bad the currently, like, they put it in a box set, like a CD box set, like maybe last year or the year before, and it's still like that same reverb sound effect laden recording that was on a cassette tape in 1989, I think. I think it's Puke 7 who has a copy of the cassette tape, which actually predates apparently the CD release that I was referring to previously. So yeah, it's crazy to me that they're still using these same masters and not taking the time and effort to update their own archive of assets, and they're still trotting out these same old recordings with new, even worse mastering. So it's
Yeah.
shameful.
Yeah, if you're trying to release a video game soundtrack, come to us. Come
Yes.
to Jeff, or even if we don't take it up ourselves, just ask, and we'll get you in contact with people who can get better hardware recordings.
Yeah, like I mean,
we'll just record it off one of these. Like everything. It doesn't matter what. Like you guys got a TurboGrafx 16 soundtrack right here. I'll figure it out. We'll make it very difficult, and we'll record it right off in the text. That's how we do it.
And he confirms that he does have the tape.
So yeah, the other thing is like we're not alone in caring about this too. Like, what others would consider good enough, there's like huge communities of people who would be disappointed by, and like it's honestly kind of like shameful that some of these releases get it the way they do, especially like some of these more like.
Just don't go too far, like all these people that are remastering the Super Nintendo soundtracks with like the original sound sources.
Those are cool. Those are cool. Those are cool demonstrations to see. But yeah, like presenting them as like an upgrade is like no.
Yeah, you and I have the same thoughts. Yeah,
I agree. Yeah,
they're a cool thought experiment.
Yeah,
but like the assumption that a lot of these are based on is that if the composers who were composing music, say for Super Mario World, had access to higher sound fidelity in the hardware, would they have chosen the same samples that they did? Would they have gone with the higher quality one? Like the reason why they chose the sounds that they did was they were working with these hardware limitations.
They would have used an actual banjo.
Yeah, right.
It reaches the point where it's like, yeah.
And it's the same thing I say to the people who talk about DPCM bit reversal and the Sunsoft bass samples. Like, if
there's a gray area. There's a gray area. It's hard to know where to draw the line. Sometimes the restoration stuff makes sense, but sometimes it's too far. Yeah,
exactly. And like,
I'm just trying to stir the pot. That's all. I know this is polarizing, so it's a good topic for a show.
It's a great discussion.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I am pretty passionate about I enjoy some of the restoration work that's out there, and some of these like more like there was a video that made the rounds a couple years ago, and I still see it pop up from time to time about making the NES into like the ideal version of its audio self, like smoothing out the noise in the triangle channel, and like it's like as a experiment. It's awesome. And as like trying out to see, okay, what can I do to make my own version of this, see how it sounds, see how it affects like the soundtracks that I know and love. Great, like do it. Claiming it is the definitive version, which I don't think. And actually, the video that we're citing here now, if you read the description, like he pretty explicitly states, like this is not meant to be, a definitive. It's not meant to be an improvement. It's just like what happens if I make like.
Yeah, it's more the discourse about.
Yeah. But yeah, like I looked at some of these efforts, and I don't feel like they're misguided. Again, I think they need experiments, but that's
I mean it's different than like when Patrick and I took the the Lagrange Point soundtrack and put it on OPLL instead of VRC7, and like being like, well, the VRC7 is a stripped down OPLL, so on OPLL it's the correct sounds and these are the right things, and like it's like and it sounds like garbage, but it's like so funny because like it's like mapped incorrectly, like that was like, but that's like the same kind of experiment, right? I'm not trying to pass that off as like this is the most definitive way of doing it, but it I think people. It's such an interesting conversation because like it used to just be, could we get it right? And now it's kind of like, can we get it right versus can we get it more right? And that's what a lot of the stuff is doing, right? It's like pure audio versus like we're excelling beyond what the actual limitations of the console were to try to get something that sounds better. I don't know. It's a long conversation because there's times where it makes sense and there's times where it doesn't. Yeah,
it's a gray area that I've had to actually like cross into that territory a little bit with some of the recording work that I've done. I had to do some Game Boy Advance work for a project that's coming up, and the hardware.
Oh no!
Oh.
I'm riveted by this because that's a chip that's not really very well like I don't understand it at all. I don't know if you guys ever covered the GBA and the retro game audio.
No, that's something that goes over my head. I talked a little bit about it with Alberto Gonzalez.
Okay.
Because he did he did several Game Boy Advance soundtracks. But just like, I remember like my eyes glossing over as he was trying to explain it to me. I was like, I'm very interested in everything I can learn from him. He's one of my favorite game composers. Up and getting to the GPA, I was going over my head. Like the limitations and all the weird quirks of the audio of the system are super weird.
I think, and tell me if I'm wrong. I think you can do GBA and Furnace Tracker, right? Pretty sure.
Is
that one of the forks?
As a non
and so Patrick, that's like
we could ask people in the chat.
Yeah, but for that example, like Patrick, some of these things that like Wonder Squan has been kind of like stuck in a box for us. There's now trackers where we can actually like make examples for this stuff. We didn't have that before.
That's huge. I remember. I was going to say, going back to the Super Nintendo episode, some of the examples audio examples were made using a Super Mario World ROM hacking tool. Is what we use to make audio examples, and it's like, no, this feels very wrong. Like this is not how this should be happening. Oh yes, we got Jeff back.
All right, so tell us about GBA. I was riveted by that.
I forget again. I don't know where I was before I was talking to the.
You said 2 words and cut
GBA.
Why does this always happen? Yeah, so I had to do some Game Boy Advance soundtrack recording work for a project that I can't talk about in detail yet. Talk to me in like November, but. Yeah, I had to cross into that gray area territory where like I was doing work above and beyond to restore the audio above what this hardware was capable of, and like there's some decent tools that exist that will allow you to play back Game Boy Advance, like a subset of Game Boy Advance soundtracks, in way higher fidelity than the hardware would be physically capable of. Like there's limitations in the Game Boy Advance audio hardware in terms of like how the mixer is done in software for a lot of cases. It comes down to a memory limitation and like a bit depth limitation. You end up reducing the format, so the audio quality in such a way that it almost makes the soundtracks unlistenable if you're trying to create, a soundtrack album. So again, this is where the difference between preserving the game music for like emulation purposes and accuracy purposes and putting together a recording for a soundtrack album. That's where like the two philosophies have to differ quite a bit. So for that particular project, I did dive into some of these restoration techniques that some people would use. And I can't really get into the super nitty-gritty details yet. It's going to be a wonderful podcast episode where we can talk about it.
I have a similar episode of a similar kind of thing where using different tools, like having to make decisions about a particular kind of expansion audio and making sure that the tool itself was meeting the needs of what we actually needed to do. So it's like, is an emulated version of this tool, which sounds a little bit better than the hardware version, better for a commercial product than the actual true to the sound of it? Because the true to the sound of it is questionable. Yeah. And I think you, by saying that, I gave away which chip it is, because there's one particular chip that has kind of an issue when you do stuff with it, and
with multiple channels above and beyond a certain number. Yeah, it could be that one.
Yeah, it could be that one. But that's the point. Like, so for that, I mean, no one can guess what I'm working on. But from that perspective, like, do you preserve the whirring? Do you preserve the crunch that you get from that, or do you just have 8 clean channels? Because one has character, but also hurts your freaking ears.
Right.
And it sounds like a vacuum cleaner is active inside of your freaking Famicom. But that's the original fidelity. So when the ask is like, can you do N163? I want 8 channels. Is it 8 channels the way that we would normally do it, or is it 8 good channels, like actually good?
Yeah.
Like doing it the right way, but the audio cleaned up. But that's tough, because like my inclination, because I'm an old crusty fart, is to be like, no, you get the whirring too. But like, I don't think people want to put headphones on and hear that. I can barely listen to Erica. We should bring it up, Erica. I can't even.
Satoru, something like that. I don't know.
How many episodes have we like mispronounced it or whatever?
That's never going to change.
This is a couple of good points.
Yeah.
Somebody mentioned Some Spoony Bard. I don't think Furnace can do GBA. The best approximation it can do would be probably a multi-chip module of DMG and some 8-bit PCM sound chip, Rico RFC. Dylan Tim says the complicated part of GBA is that sometimes musicians throw the GB sound channels into the mix, which I kind of forgot about. That you've got that in there too.
And that was one of the challenges I had to surmount with the work that I was doing, and making certain compromises in the name of making, the more enjoyable, the more desirable, listenable product. It was something that I had to make almost like a decision song by song, and in some cases soundtrack by soundtrack basis, because I hate having to talk about the generalities here rather than getting into the specifics, but it's not something that was ignored. It's not something that can be ignored. I think we just set us up here for a future episode here. Like this stream has kind of evolved into a teaser for some of the things that we're planning on episodes, planning to have episodes about.
Yep, absolutely.
Very cool.
So I guess I should say, because things are sort of evolving into a different format, we don't know if the next thing is going to be a traditional podcast. Don't know if the next thing is going to be a live stream like this. We have a lot of freedom. We're not announcing like a release schedule. That we're back in. Exactly.
No.
Next week.
No commitments. No commitments, no promises.
This is we've kind of learned from our mistakes in the past of like over promising and like over complicating this for us. And it's like, no, this is a hobby. This is something we do for fun. So we're just going to do these things when we want to, and in a way that is just kind of more enjoyable than the sort of burnout that we kind of imposed on ourselves before. With all of that in mind, if you don't already follow us on Twitter, follow us there. If Twitter like implodes and doesn't exist in the not too distant future,
very realistic possibility.
We're also on youtube.com/retrogameaudio. I'll use the community tab there. I used it for the first time tonight to say like, hey, this stream was coming up. So there's multiple places where you can follow us and stay in touch. Twitter, YouTube, our individual Twitter accounts is not a bad place. And don't forget the SoundCloud itself.
I should also mention too that we are in the process of revamping the Patreon. I don't know what the model is going to be for it or anything like that. There's still something like we had originally. Everything is suspended there. I'm sure that most of the payments that are on there are suspended anyway because they're from a million years ago. So we'll also be using that kind of as a source for information, other articles and stuff like that. But I need to look into it, dig it out, and figure out are we going to go back to monthly? Are we going to do something along those lines? And I want to make sure everyone has an opportunity for transparency, so you don't just start getting randomly charged for stuff. I don't know how many people are still on there, but it was a sizable amount of contributors at low levels. So I just want to make sure that that's addressed too. And everything will be posted there and posted here, and et cetera, et cetera. So we don't tend to hide. We don't paywall anything. I think that was kind of our goal. We didn't want to paywall anything on the Patreon. Maybe we'll like post something for people every once in a while there. But that's a good way to support us. And a lot of that stuff and a lot of the funds that we got from there went directly into hardware buys and things we have. Like we were going to do an FM Towns Marty episode. I have an FM Towns Marty sitting right here that we didn't get to use yet. The microphone I have was also bought with Patreon money. So we were able to use that to get a lot of the hardware we used to make episodes. So that's another exciting possibility for some of these rarer things that we're looking into. So gonna get more on that probably on Twitter and other sources, but just wanted to address that. Also, if you're not in the Retro Game Audio Discord, we do have a Discord channel. I'll share the link to that here if you'd like to come on in.
I was going to mention that too, because while the podcast has not showed very many signs of life in the past little while, the Discord is still reasonably active, and there's a lot of people who I would call subject matter experts in that community. Like people who will humble all of us with their knowledge from time to time. And even if you're not an active participant, it's really nice sometimes just to be a fly on the wall in those conversations. Like there's a lot to be learned from like the members of the community there. So I think the Discord was originally a Patreon exclusive, but I think since things have kind of calmed down and activity has slowed, it's now, I think you've opened it up to the public.
Oh
so,
yeah, that's just completely public
Yeah.
now, as it should be. Yeah.
It's public. I mean, I don't. It's one of those things where if someone wants to ask for it, I usually send out the link to it. But yeah, we haven't had any official policies. Like, I don't think it's on our Twitter about it or anything like that. Some of this stuff was, we had a model and a setup for it, so it's just kind of picking up the pieces of some of that and just trying to be very fair about it because we understand that it has been like 3 years or something like that. So. All right. Well, I wanted to have this set for about 2 hours, and we ended up going over, which is not a problem because we could talk forever, probably. But I think the only thing we didn't play is some of the examples of the hardship we had with Dragon Slayer, and maybe we should leave it with a couple of those audio examples.
Maybe we can just close out with a couple of the songs. Maybe we can revisit this topic in a little bit more detail as a more fully structured, either like a full episode or like a appendix episode.
Yeah, I think
that's a good idea. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because we really didn't get into like the nitty gritty details. I have a notes document that I wrote at the time when I was doing this, and it'll be fun to dig into that and call it some of the more hardships in the detail. Maybe name some of the specific tools that were used and things like that. So yeah, plenty more detail. It will be fun to dive into that in a little bit more detail. Yeah, maybe just get a couple of the recordings.
Yeah,
so
which ones?
I think I sent you one of the ending. I think I sent you ending 1 as a sample. That seems like a perfect tune to wrap the night.
Sure.
Oh, that's great.
One of my favorites from the soundtrack too. So,
awesome. So thanks everyone so much for stopping by. It's cool to be reviving retro game audio, and it was great hanging out with everyone. So yeah, everyone have a great night.
Have a good one.
And thank you for listening to Retro Game Audio.
Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching. Yeah, it's good to change it. Yeah. All right. Thanks everyone. This was super cool. Thanks.
A lot of fun too. Yeah. Thanks for everybody in the chat too. Good night, everyone.
Good night.